Mr. Jasper was lucky. The ambulance arrived quite quickly. One of the kind-hearted passers-by noticed the old man, who suddenly felt ill in the park, and immediately called the brigade. They took him to the nearest hospital and found him to be in a pre-infarction state. Although he was quickly brought to his senses, the doctors insisted on hospitalization for further observation and prevention of a second attack. Mr. Jasper flatly refused to be admitted. Frankly speaking, he had forgotten the last time he had been treated in a public hospital. He had his own trusted doctor from a private, very expensive clinic, who had been treating and monitoring him for many years. It was to him that the old man intended to turn to so that he could finally put him back on his feet. This time, however, his doctor was in agreement with his colleagues at the district hospital. "There's a high risk of another heart attack," he said. "You've really got yourself in a pickle, Mr. Jasper. You should be resting, you should be resting. You're always stressed, always thinking about work." Actually, Mr. Jasper had long been a pensioner by age, but he never gave up his job. It's a joke to be the owner of a huge company, which brought in about $500 million a year. And even though his assistants and managers were able to handle things quite well, still Mr. Jasper preferred to personally control the process and keep his hand on the pulse. There was another reason why the old man was so eager to work. The fact is that apart from work, he had nothing else in his life. Mr. Jasper had no family left in the whole world, no wife, no children, no grandchildren. He was terribly lonely. No, of course, there were colleagues, old mates, business partners, but all this was not the same. The old man had no one to come home in the evenings to his posh mansion in the suburbs. And once upon a time, things were different. Mr. Jasper slammed the bitter lump in his throat, remembering the times when there had been cheerful voices and children's laughter at home. He had destroyed all that with his own hands. And there was no one to blame for his loneliness but himself. He had once had a wife, Vanessa. Vanessa, the light of his eyes, the joy of his heart. He fell in love with her at first sight. As soon as he saw that long braid thrown over her shoulder, and cornflower, trusting eyes, deep as lakes, he courted her long and hard, beautifully. No millionaire then, just Mr. Jasper, an engineer in a factory. The most he had enough money for was to take Vanessa to an ice cream parlor, where delicious balls sprinkled with chocolate chips or hard nuts were served in tall cremains. Mr. Jasper had to walk halfway across the city to get home, because he couldn't even afford the underground. They married after Vanessa graduated from the institute and became a school teacher. The children adored her, surrounded her after school, and did not want to let her go. Looking at her, Mr. Jasper smiled contentedly, thinking that he and Vanessa would have children of their own someday, and she would be the most tender, attentive, and loving mother in the world. They dreamed of a large, close-knit family, 2 or 3 children at least. But their plans were not destined to come true. A few years after the wedding, without waiting for the desired pregnancy, Vanessa went to the doctors, and they gave her a disappointing diagnosis. Even if it is possible to conceive a child, to bear and give birth to it will be very difficult, at the cost of their own health or even life. Vanessa hid this from her husband and decided not to tell him, because she was so eager to have a child, even if it threatened her with the most serious danger. And Mr. Jasper noticed that his sweet Vanessa's eyes were crying, that she had lost weight and had withdrawn into herself because of some of her secret worries. But he did not inquire. "It's okay," his wife told him, and he believed it. It was more comfortable for him to believe. He should have made her talk. If he'd known what she was up to, he would never have let her get pregnant, by God. I wish they'd taken the baby out of the orphanage. Vanessa would be alive now. A few months later, the long-awaited pregnancy finally arrived. Mr. Jasper was flying on wings. He was ready to carry his wife in his arms and paid no attention to the anxiety that lurked in the depths of her cornflower eyes. How would he chastise himself later for his inattention? Vanessa had died in childbirth. Stunned, literally crushed by grief, her husband was left with a tiny female infant in his arms and had no idea what to do now, how to live. Fortunately, the world was not without good people. Comrades from the factory, neighbors, and especially kind-hearted neighbors helped him. The poor widower was fed by the whole house, who brought him borscht in pots, who brought him a piece of pie, who brought him a few cutlets. The old ladies in his neighborhood willingly took turns babysitting tiny Amanda. That's what Mr. Jasper called his daughter, Amanda, or more affectionately, Mandy. The grandmothers cooked her porridge or rice porridge, wheeled her around the yard in a pram, sang her songs, played fiddles. Amanda laughed merrily, blowing bubbles with her toothless mouth. Then she was put into the nursery, and Mr. Jasper felt a little better. Though generally speaking, Amanda was a clever and golden child, giving her father almost no trouble at all. But looking into her clear blue beady eyes, so similar to her late mother's bottomless eyes, Mr. Jasper felt tears welling up in his eyes. He longed desperately for his Vanessa. How he missed her. When Amanda went to school, the teachers had praised her. She was a quick learner. But the best thing she did was dancing, or rather classical choreography. From the age of 5, Amanda attended a ballet class at the Arts Center and showed great promise. Her teacher, a former ballerina at the Metropolitan Opera, called Mr. Jasper in one day and spoke at length about how amazingly talented his daughter was, and how it would be a crime if he didn't let her talent develop. Mr. Jasper listened, nodding absent-mindedly, but frankly speaking, did not take her words seriously. What kind of profession is a ballerina? It's ridiculous. You need something more grounded, more earthly. All the more so when times were troubled. A huge country collapsed, and it became quite obvious that you need to spin as hard as you can to somehow survive in this chaos. What ballet, for God's sake? Who needs it now? Amanda dreamed of going to a dance academy, but her father wouldn't let her. You need to get some promising profession, with which you will always have a piece of bread, not only with butter, but also with caviar, he urged his daughter. How about an economist? Amanda shook her head stubbornly. Her eyes filled with tears and became very big. Daddy, I don't want to be an economist. I'm not interested, and I don't understand it at all. Don't you see, you silly girl? Mr. Jasper was angry with her. Nowadays, it's all about perspective, not interest. At that time, he was busy starting his own firm, and therefore prospects, profit, and gain interested him more than anything else. In his pursuit of financial success, he missed his daughter. No, formally Amanda accepted, put away her ballet tutu and point shoes, began to attend a tutor in mathematics, preparing for admission to an economic university. But only from her eyes forever lost a lively light. She just obediently obeyed the will of his father, but as if completely lost the taste for life. What kind of a fool was he? How could he be so selfish? If it wasn't for his stubbornness and fixation on his own business, Amanda would still be alive. She didn't snap out of it right away. She obediently finished 11th grade with honors, entered one of the best economic universities in the capital on a budget. She began to study, passed her first sessions, received an increased scholarship, moved from course to course, and one day suddenly did not come home at night. Mr. Jasper almost went mad with worry. In 20 years of her life, this was the first time this had ever happened to her. Usually she always gave notice if she was late at a friend's house, but she always slept at home. He didn't know what to think. He rang all the numbers in her address book, but never found out where his daughter was. In the morning, stupefied with sleep and excitement, he was about to run to the police. When the doorbell rang, Mr. Jasper rushed to open the door and almost gasped in shock when he saw his daughter, his beloved, long-awaited Amanda. But what was her appearance? What horrifying condition? Tangled hair, a dirty face, hands and feet, as if she had been rolled in mud, a torn skirt, and the smell of cigarettes mixed with alcohol. This from her, the one who never even drank champagne on New Year's Eve. Daughter, what happened to you? He asked in a trembling voice. She suddenly looked at him angrily, almost in rage, with an evil, completely alien look, as if a stranger, and whispered, I hate you, I hate you. You've ruined my whole life. And then she sobbed bitterly and inconsolably. Mr. Jasper froze as if he had been slapped. He had never realized that his daughter's grief over her failed career as a ballerina was so great. He had thought she had long since forgotten her childhood dream. But it turns out she hadn't. She hadn't forgotten. She hadn't forgotten, and she hadn't forgiven. The next day Amanda behaved as usual with her father. She was reserved, even dry, but without the hostility of yesterday, and never said a word about the angry accusations she had hurled in his face yesterday. Mr. Jasper imperceptibly took a breath, hoping that his daughter had simply had enough and had calmed down. A month later, it was revealed that Amanda was pregnant. She never told him who the father was. He never asked. And did she even know it herself? Mr. Jasper recalled the state she'd been in when she'd come home ragged, dirty, drunk. "Lord, my child, what have you done?" He sighed brokenly, furtively wiping away a stingy male tear. Amanda was indifferent to her situation. Mr. Jasper was a man and did not know how to support her or what words to find. The only thing he could do for her was to find the best doctor in New York to manage her pregnancy. Did Amanda appreciate his concern? I don't think so. She just dutifully and indifferently visited the gynecologist for routine checkups, without showing the slightest interest in the tiny human being that was developing and growing in her belly. She finished university. Mr. Jasper's connections had helped. But of course there was no question of a first-class honors degree. Her daughter had lost all interest in her studies. And did she have any at all? The only thing that caused Amanda any glimmer of interest was ballet, when she accidentally stumbled upon ballerinas on TV. She would literally freeze in front of the screen, as if hypnotized, watching thin, delicate dancers in snow-white tutus flutter across the stage like angels. She unconsciously wiped tears from her cheeks and then squinted hatefully at her bulging belly. A few months later, Amanda safely gave birth to a child, and 3 days later, shortly before discharge, threw herself out of the window of her hospital room. The experts later said it was a classic case of postnatal depression. But Mr. Jasper knew that his girl's depression had started much earlier, and he had no one to blame but himself. He had clipped his daughter's wings with his own hands, robbed her of her dreams and a happy future. He was deaf and blind because he didn't want to consider her wishes. When the tiny bundle was placed in his arms, he experienced what is commonly known as déjà vu. Only now he was cradling not his daughter, but his granddaughter Linda. But again, as 20 years ago, he was alone with the child. Now, afraid of making the same mistakes he had made with Amanda, Mr. Jasper allowed the little girl absolutely everything. He spoiled his granddaughter without looking back, fearing that Linda would repeat Amanda's fate. But his family seemed to be under some evil spell. The spoilt and capricious girl at school was eating up miles of his nerves, forcing him to take valacordine. All she knew to do was stomp her feet and say, "I do." And he, afraid to break Linda's life with his refusals and restrictions, allowed her absolutely everything: the best toys, the best outfits, the best school in town, a prestigious elite gymnasium, to which Linda was taken by a private driver, the best gadgets. Mr. Jasper couldn't say no to any of her requests. To be more precise, his granddaughter didn't ask, she demanded. He realized later that he'd ruined her with that permissiveness. At school, his granddaughter learned poorly, crawling from class to class. Only thanks to the authority and money of her grandfather, Mr. Jasper, who was the main sponsor of the gymnasium, teachers gave her a C, closing their eyes and stepping on the throat of their principals. And in high school, they even pulled the girl out for 4s. And the certificate proudly stood solid 4s. After graduating from the 11th grade, Linda said that she was not going to go anywhere. "I am too young and too much in love with life to waste my best years on boring studies," she said. "But Linda, how can you be without education, without a profession?" questioned her grandfather in shock. "Just tell me, will I put you in any institute you want?" "I won't go to any," cut Linda off. "I'm young, Grandpa. You know, young and beautiful. I want to go out to breathe. You wouldn't understand, because you've had your time." He tried to argue, persuade, and beg, but it was useless. His granddaughter didn't even pretend that she was going to listen to his lectures and entreaties. She rolled her eyes expressively, letting him know how tired she was of his lectures. And then, what happened next was predictable: drinking, partying, dubious new friends and mates, casual liaisons. Linda got involved with bad people, got into bad company, got hooked on drugs. During that period, she was no longer like herself. She dragged valuable things out of the house to sell them and earn herself another dose. There was nothing human left in her. One day, Mr. Jasper tried to stop her. He begged her to come to her senses, to go to a clinic for treatment, to get rid of this damned addiction. But Linda, who was breaking down waiting for her dose, glared and swung a kitchen knife at her grandfather. "I'll kill you if you don't let me pass," she threatened. It was clear from her tone that she was not joking or intimidating, but really capable of murder. Mr. Jasper stepped back, obediently letting her go. When he heard the sound of the door slamming shut, he simply collapsed, sat on the floor and sobbed, realizing that he had lost his granddaughter forever. All addicts tend to end up the same way. Eventually, trouble came to their home. Linda died of an overdose. Mr. Jasper didn't remember how he survived. How could a man endure so much? He had lost his 3 favorite girls one after another, first his wife, then his daughter, and now his granddaughter. Why should he live? For what? For what? Then it was his job that saved him. Mr. Jasper worked like a man possessed, afraid to stop for even a moment. He worked himself to the point of exhaustion, so he wouldn't have time to dwell on his misfortune. His firm was growing, expanding, getting branches all over the country. There were multi-million-dollar contracts, partners around the world, trips abroad, expensive cars, a new luxurious house, respect and authority in business circles. But there was no joy, no personal happiness. Mr. Jasper was 70 years old and terribly lonely. And it wasn't the proverbial glass of water that no one would give him in his old age. The old man wasn't worried about that. His money would have been enough for a nurse who would have brought him water, champagne, Dutch cigars, and caviar sandwiches 24 hours a day, 7 days a week without a break. But that wasn't the point. There was simply no one around whom he loved with all his heart, and who would love him as much. Of course, even now, when he was old and his hair was silver, he was hunted by young, bold, showy, beautiful, long-legged girls who called him darling and kitty, swore eternal love and ineptly feigned mad passion. And Mr. Jasper was well aware that they were simply after his wealth. Probably every one of them would have agreed to marry him. So what if he was old, but he was a millionaire? But he couldn't even dream of taking one of those cloned Barbie dolls as his lawfully wedded wife. Not even a commonplace mistress. Although among the people of his circle it was considered prestigious and fashionable to go out with some young beautiful model when he had an official spouse. Mr. Jasper had no need of that. Different temperaments, different generations, different upbringings. They had nothing to talk to each other about. He was getting bored. 5 minutes into the conversation, these girls did not understand his jokes, did not watch the old films that he was so fond of quoting. Once, deciding to compliment one of them, he remembered the words from the film. "Oh boy, Arinya, beauty is Lipa, black in the lips, united in the eyebrows." The maiden, in reply to this phrase, perplexed, flapped her false eyelashes and babbled perplexedly. "What language is that, Belarusian?" It was at that moment that Mr. Jasper finally realized that they were like beings from different planets to each other. God forbid such a companion. He would rather be alone than with anyone else. His main assistants in the company were 2 bright lads, Brian and Norman. He'd hired them as young boys, fresh out of college. Now they were both experienced businessmen, real professionals. In the absence of heirs, Mr. Jasper even thought of bequeathing his company to these 2. Let them run it as a pair, on an equal footing. He couldn't make a choice in favor of one or the other. Both Brian and Norman were worthy of the position. Besides, they treated Mr. Jasper not only as their boss, but practically as their father. He was their unquestioned authority, and they literally looked him in the mouth, catching every word. When they learnt that their boss had nearly been hospitalized, the 2 rushed to his house the same evening and began to reprimand him for not taking care of his health at all. "What do you want, Mr. Jasper?" Norman was adamant. "You're not going to be doing any work for the next week. We won't let you on the doorstep." "I agree," said Brian. "And we'll tell security not to let you in either." "Talking in the ranks," grumbled the old man jokingly. "Still, touched by such attention to their own person as this, my guards won't let me into my own work." "Because your guards want a living boss, not a dead one," Norman objected reasonably. "But really, Mr. Jasper, you've got yourself in a bind. Nowhere. Your precious firm won't go away or go bankrupt without you. Brian and I will see to that." "I believe you, boys," Mr. Jasper nodded. "I believe you. The company's safe with you. But I don't know how to rest," he added, and then he waved his hands helplessly. "Once you've learnt it, you'll learn it again," Norman said sternly. "Walks in the fresh air, adequate sleep, vitamins. It's about time you got yourself some exercise." "I think I'll go to a notary and make a will in favor of the boys," Mr. Jasper thought for the umpteenth time, "because I keep going and going, and then it may be too late. And my boys will be left with nothing." It's said and done. Since Norman and Brian had given him an almost ultimatum not to come to the company's head office, he began to sort out the things he'd never got round to doing. Firstly, he visited a notary and made a will in favor of his assistants Norman and Brian. Secondly, he took long walks in the morning and evening. Mr. Jasper now spent a lot of time outdoors in parks and squares, by the pond, feeding the ducks in the shade of trees, and felt his restless soul soothed by such a measured existence. Thirdly, on the advice of a nutritionist, Mr. Jasper began to eat a balanced diet, avoiding fatty, fried, too salty or spicy foods. Fourthly, he began to read and watch films, trying his best to distract himself from other people's fates and other people's problems. Fifthly, he began to go to bed on time and had a good night's sleep, from which he instantly felt a surge of strength and energy. Such a small holiday was really necessary for me for a long time, the old man had to admit. I was running at breakneck speed, non-stop, not giving myself a break. But however wonderful his present pastime was, Mr. Jasper eventually grew bored. He was drawn back to work, to cases, papers, contracts, and deals. All right, he said to himself, just a couple more days, and that's it, 100 years rest. He walked slowly along the boulevard, breathing in the fragrance of the flowers growing in the flower beds. But his thoughts were already far away, in his office. Suddenly his attention was drawn to a group of people from the crowd at the crossroads. They seemed to be watching someone, either dancers or musicians. No wonder the city was full of street performers during the warm season. There was music coming from a speaker. Some unknown foreign singer was singing in a hoarse voice something about love, loneliness, and longing. Mr. Jasper saw through the backs of the people that there was someone dancing in the center of the circle. There was a flicker of long golden red curls, the same curls his granddaughter Linda had. Linda. The old man thought sadly. On a sudden impulse, he took a step forward, approaching the improvised concert stage, and stretched his neck, trying to see the face of the dancer. "What a girl is burning," said with admiration one of the gawkers right above his ear. "Fire." Mr. Jasper was even more curious. "Allow me," he muttered, trying to elbow his way through the crowd and squeeze into the circle. "Grandpa, where are you going?" Someone loudly indignant. "This is no place for old people." But Mr. Jasper was already in front, staring at the dancing figure. His heart jumped. Even her physique was the same as the late Linda's. The same thin, frail, flexible girl was doing some unthinkable pirouettes, spinning on her own axis, jumping, doing a twine in the air with a somersault over her head. It didn't look much like classical choreography. It looked like street dancers just improvised. But it was impossible to take one's eyes off her. Her movements were smooth, then sharp, then delicate, then provocative, almost provocative. And then, making another leap and landing on one bended knee, the dancer shook her red curls, throwing them behind her back. And Mr. Jasper was finally able to see her face. He saw it and was numb. He was literally frozen with shock, for it was Linda herself in front of him. I think he started to get short of breath. I think he woke up and wheezed, and someone immediately took him under the arm and carefully led him to the nearest bench. "Hey, the old man's not well," someone shouted loudly. But he was still turning round from the last vestiges of his strength, craning his neck in the direction where he had seen the ghost of his dead granddaughter. That it was a ghost, Mr. Jasper had no doubt. There is no such thing as people so alike in the world, unless of course they are twins. Stop, twins. Mr. Jasper clutched at this saving thought like a drowning man clutching at straws. Could it be that his unfortunate granddaughter and this dancer were really related by blood? Yes, it sounded like nonsense. Especially since Amanda only had one child. At least that's what he'd been told. But there must be some logical, scientific explanation for such a striking resemblance. Or maybe it's just a play of his fevered imagination. Suddenly, in fear, he thought, what if these street dancers are nothing like his granddaughter? I don't know what he imagined from excitement. And he did get excited. He saw a familiar type, the same figure, the same hair. So he drew a mental picture of the resemblance, which was not really there. He had to look at the girl again to be sure she was nothing like Linda. Meanwhile, he was carefully seated on a bench. The tight collar of his shirt was loosened, and a bottle of mineral water was held out to him. Mr. Jasper obediently took a few sips, tried to catch his breath, but never for a moment forgot about the dancer. "Where is she?" "I don't think she's run away," he muttered. "Well, you, grandfather, found the time and place to die," said with annoyance some tall, lanky guy. "You frightened the whole audience." "Thank you, scare away the audience?" "I don't understand?" Mr. Jasper asked. The lad shook his head irritably. "What do you say?" "No. Came in the middle of a performance, disrupted the dance. Nearly fell off himself." "Come on, Travis." Mr. Jasper heard a voice that gave him goosebumps. He couldn't believe it, but it was the voice of his granddaughter, Linda. And now it was her own voice telling Travis not to be angry with Mr. Jasper. "Don't you see, the man is sick. He didn't do it on purpose." The girl said these words conciliatingly. Mr. Jasper raised his head and fixed his eager gaze on her face. There could be no mistake. Linda, that was all. And not believing his own eyes. Linda. What if he went crazy from loneliness and started seeing hallucinations? Maybe Linda isn't even here, he thought. But she was there, standing right in front of him, and looking into his worried face, she asked with obvious concern. "Are you talking to me? Why do you call me Linda?" Mr. Jasper said in a hoarse, excited voice. "Linda. Don't you recognize me?" Mr. Jasper asked. The girl opened her mouth in amazement. "Do I know you? I think you have me confused with someone else. My name isn't Linda." It's like he's been splashed with cold water. Is he faking it, lying, or telling the truth? "What's your name?" he said. "Jennifer," she said. "No way." Mr. Jasper exhaled helplessly. "Yes, Jennifer, it's Jennifer," confirmed the guy who had complained that Mr. Jasper was scaring away the audience. "Everybody knows her around here. You've got her confused with someone else, Dad." Mr. Jasper didn't even take offense at the familiarity, at being poked. He was more concerned with another question than anything else in the world. "Who are your parents? What are their names?" he asked uncertainly. The girl immediately became sad. "They died 3 years ago, killed in a car accident. Mom's name was Natalie and Dad's name was Addison. Why do you ask? Were you familiar with them?" Mr. Jasper took a disappointed breath. Had he made a mistake? Was this remarkable resemblance only a mockery of nature? "How old are you, Jennifer?" he finally asked, just to say something. She looked at him apprehensively. "What kind of interrogation is this?" she said. But after a pause, she answered. "She'll be 21 in September." Mr. Jasper felt his breath catch again. After all, it was in September that his granddaughter, Linda, could also turn 21. "The 5th of September?" he asked quickly and excitedly. Jennifer, or whoever she was confusedly silent. "Yes," she whispered hesitantly. "How do you know? Do we really know each other? Only I don't remember you at all." Mr. Jasper took a breath. "There's no such thing as coincidence. It just doesn't happen, that's all." Jennifer," he corrected himself. "Didn't you have a sister?" The girl looked at him warily. "Wait a minute," she said incredulously. "Do you know anything about my real family?" Mr. Jasper's heart nearly stopped at these words. "The real one," Jennifer replied, biting her lower lip nervously, then sighed. "But it's a long story." "I'm in no hurry," Mr. Jasper said quickly. "I'm ready to listen as long as you like." But the disgruntled fellow intervened. "Stop talking, Jenny. Money doesn't make itself." "Travis, wait," she pleaded. "I think I found someone who knows something about me. Something I don't know." The guy made a bored face. "What do I care about that? I don't give a shit what you know or what you don't know. The main thing is that you have to work today as you should. After all, you live with me, eat my bread." The girl's face blushed red with shame. "I'm sorry," she muttered, turning to Mr. Jasper. "I really have to work." But he couldn't just let her go. He had no right. Young man, Mr. Jasper turned to Travis. How much money is Linda supposed to make today? Jennifer, I mean? How much? He smirked. The more the better. There's no such thing as too much money. I usually make between 1,000 and 10,000 a day. That's on the best days, Jennifer added hastily. But sometimes it's less. Sometimes I don't make anything all day. People come up, watch me dance, clap, take videos, but they don't pay me any money. We call them freeloaders. Travis spat contemptuously on the ground. But tell you what, Mr. Jasper said firmly. Give me your phone number. I'll drop it on your card right now. Why would I do that? Travis was indignant. I'm the boss. She gives the money to me, and then I give her her share. That's a hell of a system you've got here. Mr. Jasper shook his head. You don't dance, and you take the girl's earnings for yourself. I give her a roof over her head and a piece of bread, said the boy indignantly. What would she do without me? Where would she go? She'd be wandering in the rubbish heap. A benefactor, said Mr. Jasper, grinning. All right, give me your number, and I'll pay for Jennifer for the time being. For that, you'll let me and her have a quiet, unhurried talk. It won't be cheap, Travis grumbled greedily. 50,000, Mr. Jasper said calmly. Both Jennifer and Travis were momentarily speechless. 50,000? Travis asked, stunned. Are you serious now? I'm dead serious, Mr. Jasper nodded. Jennifer was suddenly frightened. What could she expect from this strange old man who spoke in riddles, called her Linda, and was willing to pay $50,000 for her? If you think I'm providing intimate services, she said with a hitch. She said with a hitch, then you're wrong. And nothing of the sort is going to happen. Do you understand what I mean? No private dances or anything like that. Mr. Jasper stared at her in genuine amazement. What he said in shock. What intimate favors, what private dances? I just want to talk. Girl, I guarantee you complete and absolute safety. With these words, he turned to Travis and added, I promise you. However, it was written all over Travis' face that for that kind of money he wouldn't hesitate to send Jennifer to bed even with this old man. Mr. Jasper shook his head disapprovingly, but said nothing aloud. Instead, he turned round and addressed the girl. Let's go and get something to eat somewhere. There are lots of different cafes around here. Jennifer swallowed hungry saliva so loudly that it was clear the girl was terribly hungry. Killing that Travis isn't enough, Mr. Jasper raged to himself. He's got the girl down, and she hasn't had a crumb in her mouth for God knows how long. How long are you taking her away for? Travis asked after her. Mr. Jasper turned his head slightly in his direction and said, I've paid for her working day in full, so she's free until tonight and doesn't have to come back. Or do you have any objections? Travis immediately got cold feet about losing the money he had received and instantly backtracked. Nothing. It's all paid for, said Travis. So take her for as long as you like. Mr. Jasper took the girl under his arm gently, fearing to frighten her. He was just afraid that she would get scared at the last moment and run away from him, disappear, and he had no right to lose her. What kind of cuisine do you prefer? He asked with a carefree look. Spanish, Italian, Asian? Jennifer smiled shyly. Anything. As long as it's not too expensive. And the portions aren't too small, she joked. I just don't have a lot of money on me. Don't worry about money, Mr. Jasper said. I invited you, so I'll pay for dinner. Are you a rich millionaire? Jennifer asked curiously. Do you throw money around so easily? Here Mr. Jasper only hummed, but left the question unanswered. Poor girl, he thought. What has she seen in her life if to her a simple trip to a cafe means throwing money? In the end, they chose a small, cozy summer cafe with a youthful menu. Jennifer was embarrassed at first, but then ordered a pizza and nuggets and a milkshake to go with it. Mr. Jasper limited himself to green tea, as he wasn't hungry at all. While the poor girl ate, he didn't pester her with questions. He drank his tea in silence, avoiding a close look at the girl, but nevertheless he noted characteristic details. Thin arms, protruding collarbones, vertebrae on her back that could be counted. The girl had obviously been starving for a long time. Killing that Travis isn't enough, Mr. Jasper thought again with anger. Boasts of having provided Jennifer with a roof over her head and a piece of bread. I don't see the poor girl eating enough. She's a dancer. She needs strength, a lot of strength and energy. It was evident that Jennifer was trying hard to restrain herself from eating too greedily. But at the same time, she was eating in a way that was painful to watch. She was licking her fingers, shoveling nuggets and pizza into her mouth. At last she was full and belatedly realized that she must have been acting like a real glutton. An embarrassed blush spread across her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she mumbled faintly. "For what?" Mr. Jasper was genuinely surprised. "I'm glad you have a good appetite. After all, you needed to eat." Jennifer wiped her fingers and mouth thoroughly with a napkin. Already more relaxed, she sipped her cocktail through a straw. "Well, you can ask your questions," she finally said. "I can see you're eager." Mr. Jasper hesitated, not knowing where to begin. The subject was too sensitive. Noticing his predicament, Jennifer came to his rescue. "Why did you call me Linda?" she asked. Instead of answering, Mr. Jasper reached into his jacket pocket for his wallet. Opening it, he showed Jennifer a color photograph of the late Linda, which he kept old-fashioned under the clear plastic. For some reason, he didn't like to keep the photo on his phone, and he hardly ever took pictures with it. Jennifer leaned over to get a better look at the photo and immediately recoiled in involuntary horror. "What is that? Who is it? Is that me, or is that not me? I don't remember being photographed like that, and I don't have a dress like that." Mr. Jasper smiled sadly and shook his head. "That's not you. That is my granddaughter, Linda. She too was born on the 5th of September, and she would be the same age as you are now." The attentive Jennifer immediately seized on that phrase. "Would have been. You mean to say that?" The old man nodded. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Linda's dead. That's why I was so shocked when I saw you. You know, the resemblance is uncanny." Jennifer sighed softly. "My mom used to tell me I had a sister. All my childhood I dreamed of finding her. I believed that someday my sister and I would meet. But unfortunately, Mom didn't know anything about where to find her." Mr. Jasper took a deep breath. "Tell me about your foster parents," Mr. Jasper asked. "So they didn't hide the fact that you weren't related from you?" Jennifer shook her head. "Told the truth. Why, when I was 14 years old. But that doesn't change anything. I still love them. Until the very last day," she added bitterly. "Do you know how you came to be in this family?" Mr. Jasper asked excitedly. The girl shrugged her thin shoulders. "Only in the most general terms. My mom worked as a midwife in a maternity hospital. She and my dad didn't have children of their own, though they wanted to. Then one day a girl was brought to the maternity hospital, very young and lost. Indifferent, as if she didn't care what would happen to her and her pregnancy. That was my real mom." Amanda, Mr. Jasper finished quietly, and as Jennifer stared at him in bewilderment, he explained her name was Amanda. "Maybe Mom didn't tell me," that Jennifer nodded. "So what happened next?" "Next, this girl had a difficult labor. She lost a lot of blood, and twins were born, me and my sister Linda. And if Linda was more or less all right, then me. I was very sick and weak. The doctors were afraid to even give me a prognosis. They expected me to die, but the girl didn't seem to care. She didn't seem to care whether her daughters lived or died. And then my mom, Natalie's mom Jennifer explained, begged her to give up her sick child. She said she fell in love with me at first sight. I was so small and helpless, and nobody wanted me. Anyway, she convinced my real mom to sign the papers." "And Amanda did," Mr. Jasper finished in a low voice. "Without saying a word to me. Did she have any idea what she was doing? She was completely out of her mind. And then?" Then Jennifer said quietly, "Then, just before she was discharged, she threw herself out of a window and died." Jennifer said very quietly, "And my sister Linda was left without a mother. She was raised by By me, Mr. Jasper nodded bitterly. But unfortunately, I didn't keep her safe. Just like I couldn't keep Amanda and Vanessa safe. Who's Vanessa? Jennifer asked, puzzled. That's my wife, your grandmother. She died a long time ago too, 40 years ago. Her heart was weak, and we have no more children or grandchildren. I see, Jennifer clarified. Mr. Jasper shook his head sadly. Not a living soul. Well, except for you. God, I still can't believe you're really my granddaughter. He covered his eyes for a moment. I can't believe it either, she admitted. Ever since I found out the truth, I've always wanted to find one of my blood relatives, to meet them, to talk to them. Your foster parents, did they ever hurt you? He asked cautiously. Jennifer shook her head. No, on the contrary, they didn't hurt me. They adored me. They adored me. They put all their unspent parental love in me, and I loved them very much too. That accident just wiped out my whole happy life, and all hell broke loose. She covered her face with her hands. Mr. Jasper gently stroked her skinny shoulder. How come you had nowhere to live after Mom and Dad died? And suddenly some distant relatives from Wyoming showed up. I never really knew if they were on my mom's side or my dad's side. They immediately began to intimidate me, threaten me, and finally almost forced me to go to a notary and get a deed of gift for Mom and Dad's flat. I was the only heir. And these scoundrels dared to rob an orphan. Mr. Jasper was outraged. Yes, you should have reported them to the police, Jennifer said quietly. I was just so frightened. I was all alone and confused and didn't know what to do. I probably would have died. I probably wouldn't have survived on the streets if it wasn't for Travis. He helps people like me, Jennifer continued. Gives us a roof over our heads, and then he makes us work for him. He may seem callous to you, but he's been my only salvation. Well, you're not going back to that savior, Travis, Mr. Jasper said firmly. I'll see to that. After all, I am your own grandfather, and I have no problem with your living arrangements. Jennifer stared at him. Do you want me to live in your house? Why not? It's not like we're strangers. I've got plenty of room. So you're going to officially recognize me as your granddaughter, to conduct a genetic test to prove the kinship? God be with you, girl. Mr. Jasper waved his hands at her. What kind of expertise? Why do we have to be so formal? I know you're my kin without any expertise. You're my soulmate. You and Linda are the same face, the same voice. I still get goosebumps when I look at you. Jennifer averted her eyes and nervously hooked her fingers in a lock. Yes, but we're only related in fact, but in fact we're complete strangers to each other. I don't know you at all. You don't know me either. Wouldn't you be afraid to bring someone you don't know into your house? What if I kill you or rob you? Mr. Jasper couldn't bear it and laughed, throwing his head back. Who you? You're a burglar. It's written on your forehead, child, that you wouldn't hurt a fly. Yes, I don't know you as well as a grandfather should know his granddaughter, but I know in my heart that you're a good man. And the fact that we don't know each other, that's not a problem. We'll gradually get to know each other while we have time, he added, thinking. I'm not forever, unfortunately. Mr. Jasper is already at a young age. Jennifer's face changed. On impulse, she leaned forward and grabbed the old man's hand, squeezing it in her warm palms. Don't say that, she exclaimed almost in terror. Please don't. I have only just found my only kinsman, my grandfather, and I haven't even had time to get used to the thought. Don't talk and think bad thoughts. Okay? All right, Mr. Jasper nodded, with a touch of sadness in his voice. But then you and I really shouldn't waste any time. You're moving in with me now. Jennifer didn't object. Tall Travis was certainly confused when Jennifer announced to him that she was leaving. Wow, that's some news, he muttered. I can't say I'm happy about it. You're one of my best dancers. I'm going to miss you terribly. Mr. Jasper thought irritably to himself. It's not Jennifer you'll miss. It's the money she brought you. He saw right through the sly man. But he decided not to provoke a conflict, giving everyone a chance to part peacefully. Jennifer had almost no belongings, nothing to pack but the papers Travis kept in his desk drawer. While she was putting her belongings into a small traveling bag, Travis stood nearby, watching her packing as if he was afraid Jennifer might grab something valuable that didn't belong to her. Jennifer didn't seem to notice his suspicious glances. She seemed genuinely grateful to the man, and even cried one last time when she hugged him goodbye. Finally, she and Mr. Jasper walked out of the driveway. Jennifer hesitantly stopped and looked at her grandfather. "How are we going to get there? By underground? Do you live far away?" "Yes, a bit far," Mr. Jasper grinned, referring to his country mansion. "I'm afraid the underground doesn't go there, Jennifer." With these words, he took out his mobile phone and dialed the number of his driver. "Shall we take a taxi?" Jennifer guessed. Immediately, Jennifer frowned worriedly. That must be very expensive. What was her surprise when a luxury black foreign car drove into the courtyard and pulled up neatly in front of the entrance. Jennifer was even more shocked when the driver got out of the car, and with a respectful nod to Mr. Jasper, and then to Jennifer, gallantly opened the passenger side doors. "Please," he said politely. "Is this your personal driver?" Jennifer asked in a whisper of amazement, dumbfounded. "That's great." But the biggest shock was ahead of her. When they passed the city center with its traffic jams, and then entered the elite suburban village, the amazed girl opened her mouth and did not close it until the car slowed down at the gate of a luxurious two-story mansion. Hidden in the dense greenery of trees and surrounded by a beautiful fence of metal, Jennifer looked like she was about to faint. As she climbed out of the car, she marveled at the views before her and then reached her verdict. This is not a house, it's a palace. Inside, however, the palace turned out to be a modern dwelling. Mr. Jasper asked the housekeeper to give the girl a little tour of the house. Jennifer, as fascinated, wandered through the rooms, looking at the paintings on the walls, photographs, exquisite expensive furniture, and other attributes of the life of millionaires, which before she had seen only in the cinema. "Mr. Jasper," the maid asked, "which room do you want to prepare for your guest?" The old man smiled. "This is not a guest. This is my own granddaughter, and she herself will choose the room she likes best." Of course. All the servants did not give away their shock with a look, word, or gesture. They were not paid to express surprise or disagreement. In the end, Jennifer opted for a small, cozy room with a private bathroom. She was captivated by the view. It overlooked a garden with fresh, lush greenery and colorful flower buds. "It's marvelous here," she exhaled. "I don't even have words to describe everything I feel," Jennifer said. Mr. Jasper smiled. "This is the former room of Amanda, your mother." Oh, Jennifer fell respectfully silent, and then shifted her gaze to a framed photograph that hung above the bed. The picture showed a fragile, flexible girl in a snow-white tutu and pointe shoes standing on a ballet barre. With her chin proudly raised, she was performing some complicated piaz, standing on the toes of one foot, her other foot held high and backwards. Was she a ballerina? Jennifer asked in a reverent whisper. There was a lingering sadness in Mr. Jasper's eyes. Not professionally, no, though she had always dreamed of it. She'd done ballet for a few years, but after high school she'd chosen a different profession. But why not a choreographic institute or a ballet academy? Jennifer wondered, since, as you say, it was her dream. Grandfather sighed guiltily. It's a long story. Someday I will definitely tell it to you, but not now. Now you need to get some rest. You can take a shower, put your things away, and at 8 o'clock, please come down to the dining room for dinner. Do I have to dress up? Jennifer asked a little nervously. Actually, I don't have any holiday clothes with me. Mr. Jasper laughed good-naturedly. You're home, Jennifer, relax. This is an informal reception, not a visit from any important guests, but a dinner in a small family circle. It's just me and you, no one else. There's no dress code in this house. So you can go out in your pajamas. Jennifer took a breath and sighed with relief. However, there was no family dinner. As Jennifer, refreshed from her shower, easily ran down the stairs to the dining room, she heard men's voices. One of them was undoubtedly her grandfather's, but the other two were unfamiliar to her. Jennifer immediately tensed and slowed down, listening to see if it would be appropriate to barge into the dining room now. What if there was some important conversation going on in there that wasn't meant for her ears? But at the same instant, she thought she heard her name. It was clearly about her. Jennifer hesitated for a moment, but pushed open the door and entered. She was immediately stared at by 3 pairs of eyes, her grandfather's and 2 other strange men, or rather guys. And these guys were not only young, but also unusually good-looking, as if they were film actors or models from the cover of a glossy magazine. One was a brunette with piercing brown eyes from under dark eyebrows, the other a gray-eyed blonde with a kind smile. Jennifer froze confused, not knowing how to react to say hello or to wait for them to say hello first. Damn, she knew absolutely nothing about the rules of etiquette. Fortunately, Mr. Jasper came to her rescue. "Jennifer," he exclaimed excitedly and cheerfully. Come in, baby. Let me introduce you to my assistants. They have come to check on me and ask about my health. Each of them is my right-hand man at work. I don't know what I'd do without them." 2 right hands? Jennifer said with an innocent twinkle in her eye. Interesting, but unnatural. The blonde immediately laughed good-naturedly at her joke, but the brunette's eyes darkened and became almost black. He didn't seem to appreciate the humor. "This is Brian, grandfather," introduced the smiling blonde. He looked at Jennifer cheerfully and directly, and that pure, sincere look calmed her down a little. It seemed that no one was going to make fun of her for breaking the rules of etiquette and dress code. "And this is Norman," Mr. Jasper introduced the brunette. He smiled discreetly at her and even kissed her hand, which made her blush. But still, in spite of his outward affability, there was something cold and repulsive about Norman. Jennifer couldn't explain it in words, she just felt it. The dinner was rather hectic. Jennifer was occasionally embarrassed by her clumsiness and her inability to use all those knives and forks. She couldn't even taste the food and barely remembered what they ate. Brian told jokes and entertained everyone as best he could. Jennifer enjoyed laughing at his jokes. Norman, on the other hand, seemed to be watching her from the sidelines. She could feel his gaze on her cheek, crawling across her face like a pesky bug, and there was nothing kind about it. Brian noticed it too. As dinner came to an end and the boys said goodbye to the owner and his granddaughter, leaving the house, Brian asked his friend, "What fly bit you? What's your beef with the girl? I thought you were going to kill her with that look." Norman grinned unkindly. "Doesn't anything about this story bother you? It's a bit of a mess, mate." "What do you mean?" Brian didn't understand. An old man suddenly has a granddaughter who's come out of nowhere. She tells him a not-so-simple and hastily concocted story about twins. It's like an Indian film, he snorted contemptuously. "What are you implying?" Brian was wary. "That she's lying, of course," Norman explained. "Why would she lie?" The boy wondered. "It's written all over her face. You only have to look at her to realize that she looks exactly like the dead Linda." "Oh, please." Norman rolled his eyes ironically. With today's plastic surgery, there may have been a slight resemblance from nature, but with the help of specialists, she'd made it absolute. She'd deliberately caught Mr. Jasper's eye, played up a supposedly chance encounter, and he'd gone straight for it. He fell for it. You heard him yourself. He won't even have an examination. He's got it all figured out. So he drags this tramp into the house. But why would she do that? Brian said with doubt in his voice. Are you stupid, or are you just pretending to be? Norman looked at him with annoyance. She's after the old man's money, of course. It's not just a couple or 3 million, it's a fortune. I don't know, said Brian. She seemed pretty honest and open to me. I see she's charmed you too, said Norman. But it's up to you. You just watch out that we'll be left with nothing after the old man's death. He was going to bequeath the company to you and me, and now he'll just as soon rewrite his will and leave everything to his granddaughter. He spat on the ground with annoyance. Well, even if he did, it'd be fair, Brian shrugged. She's his only relative. Even if she is his only relative, Norman said indignantly. How long has he known her? A few hours. We've been working with him for years. We're more related to him than anyone else, and now we're going to lose everything because of this insolent girl. So you're worried about the inheritance? Brian was taken aback. You're a cynic, Norman. Yes, I am, he said sharply. I put everything I've got into this company. I work from morning till night. This company is my everything, you know. I don't want it to go to some stupid chicken. But your want isn't going to change anything, Brian grinned. What can you do now? There's nothing you can do about it. We'll see what I can do, Norman grinned slyly. But he said nothing more. Mr. Jasper had indeed decided to rewrite the will. He didn't want to prolong the process. He really was not old. Anything could happen to him at any time. However, he kept his plans to go to the notary secret from Jennifer. He didn't want to embarrass her too much. The girl still hadn't got used to the role of his granddaughter and still felt awkward in the huge, luxurious house. When her grandfather had suggested she go shopping and update her wardrobe, she had only waved her head negatively and quietly objected. I have a pair of jeans and t-shirts. I don't need new clothes yet. Thank you. Those things are still intact. Jesus, Jennifer, he shook his head. Do you only buy new clothes when the old ones are torn and worn out? Sometimes you just have to treat yourself. But Jennifer repeated, I don't need anything yet. Thank you. Mr. Jasper also talked to Jennifer about the future, finding out what she would like to do. Confused, the girl confessed that she had always been attracted to the world of dance. However, she didn't have to explain that. Mr. Jasper could see for himself how talented she was. Would you like to study at the Academy of Choreography? He suggested. I'll make sure you get in without any problems. Jennifer's eyes went wide. Really? There's a huge competition, I heard. It's impossible for a mere mortal to get in on a budget, or even a fee-paying student, and it costs a lot of money to study there. Don't worry about that, smiled my grandfather. I have enough authority and connections to get you on the budget, although, believe me, I'd have enough money even for paid tuition. Tell me the main thing, do you want to study there yourself? Honestly, don't try to please me. Tell me what you think. I don't want to put pressure on anyone else to study. Honestly? Jennifer raised her eyes dreamily to the sky. I really do. I'm crazy. If I could get in, it would be a dream come true. Mr. Jasper grinned good-naturedly. You'll get in then. Dreams should come true, especially for young and talented girls. Jennifer had a whole new life. Sometimes she even thought she was dreaming a wonderful dream. She was afraid that one day she would open her eyes and find that everything had dissipated like a morning mist. And in fact, she had no loving, caring grandfather, no choreographic academy, no new friends, no Brian. Yes, the grandfather's assistant, gray-haired and smiling blonde Brian, began unobtrusively courting the girl. At first, it seemed to her that she was just making up all the signs of attention he was giving her. But then she became convinced it was serious. When Brian looked at Jennifer, there was so much admiration and tenderness in his eyes that her stomach began to flutter butterflies. Jennifer didn't like the behavior of his colleague Norman. When they crossed paths in Mr. Jasper's office, she sometimes caught his heavy, gloomy, unkind gaze, from which she wanted only to cover herself with her hand and shiver. One day she overheard a fragment of a conversation between Brian and Norman. You're a good boy, Norman said with a wicked chuckle. You're so quick, aren't you? What do you mean? Brian asked glumly. I don't understand. Oh, come on, he doesn't get it, he said, frowning. Commendable. Someone he's talking about, Jennifer thought. Who's he talking about? Brian frowned. Is it about me? She wasn't sure she'd heard and understood everything correctly. After all, one could be wrong. Still, those words kept her mind on them. She continued to think about them for days. One day, Mr. Jasper asked her to stop by his office. At lunchtime, he said, we'll have to go somewhere on business. No sooner had Jennifer stepped into the lift than someone immediately jumped in after her. She recognized the second passenger as Norman with distaste. She hated to be in a cramped car with him, but not to jump out now? That would be quite foolish. She looked away, but she could still see in the mirror that Norman was looking at her. He did not even try to hide his dislike. His lips curved squeamishly. Why does he hate me so much? Jennifer shuddered. I haven't done anything to him. Norman was the first to break the long silence. What are you doing here? He asked ironically. Jennifer shrugged her shoulders. Grandpa asked me to stop by today. Said we had some business to attend to. A notary, I think. I didn't quite get it, she explained simply. She didn't understand, did she? Norman grinned. What a way to pretend to be an innocent lamb. It was offensive and really incomprehensible. So Jennifer remained silent. To the notary, then? Norman repeated meaningfully. Good for Brian, he got it in time, so he might get something. What's Brian got to do with it? Jennifer didn't get it again. Why do you keep talking in riddles? Do you want to know what I mean? Norman squinted, and in the depths of his dark eyes there was a sinister light. You mean you want to know the truth? He emphasized the last word with his intonation. She nodded. Of course I do. But then he firmly pressed the button for the top floor. We need to talk without witnesses. Where are we going? Jennifer was confused. To the roof. No one will interfere with us there. The top floor did indeed have a rooftop exit. Jennifer looked at the view from the top of the roof and was afraid. Norman, on the other hand, seemed afraid of nothing. He walked to the very edge and looked down fearlessly. People from that height looked like ants. What was it you wanted to tell me? Jennifer reminded him in a shaky voice, anxious to get out of here. Why do you think Brian started courting you? Norman answered the question with a question. The answer was obvious, but Jennifer realized that there was a catch. Because he liked me, she suggested uncertainly. Norman laughed heartily. Naive. He's just after your money. Jennifer frowned. What are you talking about? I don't have any. Well, you don't now, but you will soon, when the old man's gone. Norman said dismissively. You're his heiress. That's why he called you here, to make it official with the notary today. Norman, how can you say that about my grandfather? The old man's going to drop out. Jennifer looked at him with regret. Tell me you don't secretly dream of it. Norman laughed, drilling her with his gaze. All people want to have as much money and power as possible. Do you dream of getting your paw into your grandfather's fortune? Brian dreams of seducing you, and thus get his hands on Mr. Jasper's money. I wouldn't be surprised if he proposes to you within the next few days. Jennifer looked at him with regret. What about you? Are you like the only clean-cut one among us? We're all thinking about self-interest and you're not. Why not? Norman agreed. I'm just like you, practical. It's just that unlike you hypocrites, I don't pretend to be an angel. Yes, I always dreamed of owning your grandfather's company, and by golly, I would have. The old man's already prepared a will. I would have taken over his company if it wasn't for you. You're a hard man to find, he shouted, looking at Jennifer with fury. She was startled by the force of his hatred. Her foot twisted, and Jennifer almost fell. Run away from here, her temples rattled. He's completely insane. But barely had she made an attempt to step past Norman inside when he blocked her path, grabbed the girl's arm and twisted it sharply. Jennifer cried out in pain. Where are you going? He whispered. Grandpa's waiting, Jennifer said in a shaky voice. He won't, Norman grinned. After all, he was used to it. First his wife, then his daughter, then his granddaughter. If you go too, the old man will take it as a fate, as his own damn fate. What do you want to do to me? The girl turned pale. I'm nothing, he openly mocked her. You yourself will now go to the edge of the roof, fall down. Oh my, what a carelessness, what an unfortunate and tragic accident. I tried to save you, of course, but I didn't have time. That's exactly what I'm going to tell everyone. You monster. Jennifer exhaled in a trembling voice. Maybe I am, but no one can prove it. And most importantly, the old man's will leave everything as it was. I'll be part owner of the company. With these words, he grabbed Jennifer by the shoulders and threw her over the low rim of the roof to the outside. She clutched at the sleeves of his jacket with her fingers and hung over the abyss, desperately wiggling her legs and trying to climb back up. Let go. Norman wheezed, trying to unclench her fingers. You fool, you idiot. Help, Jennifer screamed with all her might. Jennifer's fingers were weakening. In another moment, she would fall into this void, into this abyss, and in a few more seconds she would crash to the pavement. Somebody help. She screamed with exertion. Norman was still trying to throw her off him. As the girl was pulling him down with all her weight, Jennifer felt that she had little strength left. That's it. It's over. I've lost, she thought. At that moment, a whirlwind came at Norman from behind. A moment later, someone yanked Jennifer's arm so sharply that she cried out in piercing pain. She was dragged up over the edge so that she scraped her knees against it. Then she was also abruptly released, and the girl collapsed heavily to the floor. And in another second, she saw two male figures, clutching in a desperate scramble, skating across the roof. One of them was Norman, and in the other she was surprised to recognize Brian and almost cried with relief. How timely had he turned up? He had literally saved her life. If it hadn't been for him, she'd be nothing but a wet spot by now. Do you want to order yourself the whole company? Norman wheezed, trying to punch Brian, but the man prevented him from doing so. No way. I don't have the guts. I and only I should be at the helm. You're out of your mind, Brian retorted, trying to dodge another blow. You measure everything in terms of money, not feelings. I don't care about the company. You see why you're trying to stop me if you don't care. Norman swung round and punched Brian angrily in the face. His head jerked and blood spurted from his nose. Because I love Jennifer, you jerk. Jennifer was outraged. She realized belatedly that she should call for help. She tried to reach for the phone, but the arm Brian had pulled her by, pulling her upstairs, was pierced with savage pain. Then the girl clumsily got up and headed for the hatch through which they had entered the roof. There was no more time to climb down the ladder, so Jennifer simply stuck her head out through that hatch and screamed, seemingly to the entire multi-story building. Help, somebody, help over here. At the same moment, Jennifer saw the guards running towards her and desperately waved her healthy arm at them. Over here on the roof. Faster, please, they'll kill each other. And then from a great nervous strain of strength left her, and the girl lost consciousness. The media was buzzing about the incident for a long time, every time coming across another headline like attempted murder of millionaire's only granddaughter. Jennifer shuddered and covered with cold sweat. In the end, her grandfather, Mr. Jasper, got angry and forbade her to visit news sites and read newspapers. But the girl continued to have nightmares. Again and again she saw herself hanging over the abyss and woke up screaming. Mr. Jasper took her away from the hustle and bustle for a couple of weeks to the sea, where he also had his own house. It was not as big and luxurious as the one in Washington, but it was cozy right on the coast. As it turned out, Brian had dislocated her arm. Not on purpose, of course, but trying to save her life. But the arm healed terribly slowly, which caused Jennifer great inconvenience, and she missed the young man. But after that nightmare, he never wrote or called her. Grandfather had mentioned in passing that Brian had been hurt too. I think he even had a slight concussion. But Jennifer still resented him for forgetting about her. He said he loved her up there on the roof. Norman was awaiting trial. Jennifer didn't want to hear from him or remember him, and only hoped he would get what he deserved. Mr. Jasper was so shaken by his assistant's treachery that he too did not want to know anything more about him. The days passed lazily and in the same way. Jennifer slept a lot, ate fresh fruit, walked along the beach, and bathed. Physically, she was already quite healthy, but her soul was longing. One evening, having bathed and leaving the sea, she saw a familiar figure on the shore. Her heart beat faster. At first, Jennifer even thought that she was mistaken. But no, as she got closer, she realized that she couldn't mistake the blonde hair, the laughter, and the gray eyes for anyone else's. Brian, she breathed out and threw herself into his open arms. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" she exclaimed, her face pressed against his shirt, dying of happiness. "I wanted to surprise you," he said, kissing the top of her head. "What took you so long?" She pounded her fists on his chest in feigned fury. "I've been imagining all sorts of things." "I didn't want to scare you with my creepy look," Brian laughed and explained. "Jennifer, I had bruises all over my face. Norman beat me up pretty bad. I was waiting for it to heal." "You didn't want to propose to the girl you love with such a handsome man." Jennifer flared up and was confused. Quietly repeating proposal after him, he nodded and gazed into her eyes with excitement. "Perhaps you've decided it's too soon. After all, we haven't met that long ago. But I know for a fact that you're the only one I want to spend the rest of my life with. I don't need anyone else." Jennifer was silent, stunned by his confession and proposal, ready to die of happiness. But Brian interpreted her silence in his own way. "I understand," he said after a moment's hesitation. "After what Norman said to you on the roof, it must be hard for you to trust people again. He made me out to be some kind of Alfonso, after your money, after your grandfather's company." Jennifer hastily covered his lips with her palm. "Stupid," she said fondly. "Oh my God, you're so stupid. How could you think I would believe such ridiculous stories? If you really wanted money and power, it would have been in your interest to let Norman kill me. And then you would have handed him over to the police, and, in effect, you would have been the only candidate for the inheritance. You saved my life." She looked him seriously in the eye. "Do you expect me to need any more explanations after that?" Jennifer took her hand away from his lips, and Brian caught her hand and kissed her delicate fingers. "I don't get it, do I?" he asked. "Is that a yes or a no? Will you marry me?" Jennifer shook her head. "Well, I'm telling you, stupid. Don't you get it? How did you ever get so far in your career with that cluelessness of yours?" "I can't think straight with you around," Brian joked. "I've lost my head in love. Why would I want a husband who's clueless?" The girl continued to try his patience. "He's obviously amused," said Mr. Jasper, who had appeared out of nowhere. "Well, stop torturing the boy, really. Come on, come on." Jennifer laughed, nodded, and looking at Brian with shining eyes, exhaled happily. "I do." Late for work, Jessica saw her husband, who should be home, deciding to follow him. Jessica walked down the city streets, keeping her eyes on the backs of passers-by. For the first time in her life, she, an adult family woman, was following a man, and that person was her husband, Alex. Was Camila right? A colleague from work, who lived not far from this place, said she'd seen Alex a couple of times in a restaurant with a girl. A beautiful blonde, long-legged, stylish couple were discussing something animatedly. Occasionally, the lady stroked Alex's shoulder encouragingly. "You're wrong," Jessica said confidently. "Alex and I have always had a trusting, close relationship. We share our joys and worries with each other, tell each other how the day went." "No, of course, Camila's wrong. She's only seen the man a couple of times in her life, so she's confused him with someone else." Camila was generally skeptical about Jessica's marriage. The woman's acquaintance with Alex had taken place practically in front of her eyes, and she had then confidently declared that the relationship had no prospects. "Oh, mate, if I were you, I wouldn't get enchanted before the time, so as not to be disappointed later," Camila said. "We've been there, we know. Everything hurts afterwards." Jessica realized that there was some truth in her colleague's words. But next to Alex, she felt so loved, so protected. He looked at her with love and tenderness, protected her, tried to please her. It could not be a deception. "It's not the experience," Camila said in response to Jessica's objections. "Right now, he really feels that you are the woman of his life, hormones, confetti bouqueting period, all that. But as time passes, he'll take a sober look at the situation and realize everything." Jessica realized that maybe her friend was right. After all, Alex was so perfect, so handsome. His turquoise eyes and tanned face, the dimples on his cheeks when he smiled. Jessica was ready to admire his smile endlessly. She had never felt this way about anyone before. Alex, a lead engineer at a major oil company. He supervises almost 100 people. Alex is a smart, driven, grasping man. He had a prestigious university in the capital. He was offered to stay in Washington, but he did not want to leave his hometown. His elderly parents lived here. Alex was a late and only child. He couldn't leave his mom and dad. Having returned, he never once regretted it, in his own words. Alex's parents were wealthy people. His father, in the past a large by the standards of the city entrepreneur, the owner of a dairy plant, which brought large profits. Previously, he was allegedly engaged in the restaurant business in Washington, but after the birth of his son changed the occupation. The family moved from the capital to a quiet provincial town with developed infrastructure and good ecology. I always thought it was better to raise children in small towns, Kimberly, Alex's mother, said of the move many years ago. Contrary to silly stereotypes, Jessica has an ideal relationship with her in-laws. In a way, they replaced her parents, although they were more like grandparents in age. Jessica vaguely remembered her mom and dad. They died when she was 5 years old, going for mushrooms in the forest, and did not return. The girl was taken in by her grandmother, her mom's mom, who gave her everything she could. Jessica adored her grandmother, but at the age of 20 she was left all alone. Her last relative was gone. She wanted the love and support of a close person by her side. Probably that's why she got in touch with Bernard, who at first seemed to be perfect. When the tragedy occurred, Jessica was in her 3rd year of study at the University of Economics. She got into university thanks to her grandmother. From childhood, she encouraged her granddaughter to study and strive for a better life. Their small family, in Bridget's opinion, was not poor. At least they certainly did not starve. But the grandmother always lamented that she could not take her granddaughter to show her big cities and other countries. The girl did not understand these worries. Bridget was quite satisfied with her life. "I traveled the world thanks to my work," she said. She had been a train conductor all her life and had visited many interesting places. Grandma loved to reminisce about those happy times, and her granddaughter simply adored her stories. "Well, what are your years? Everything will still be," Bridget wondered. "What's so interesting about traveling?" "Yes, Grandma's stories are fascinating, but why be upset that there's no money for traveling now? You can watch all that stuff on TV." Then, when Alex showed Jessica the world, she realized what Grandma meant. It was a pity that she couldn't share her impressions with her family. Alex is the best gift that fate has given Jessica. He literally changed the life and outlook of a woman. Next to her spouse, she always felt peaceful. They have been together for so many years, and nothing has changed all the same tenderness, admiration. Both have become each other quite dear. The household has not bogged them down, as many warned. Alex still looks at his wife with love, still tries to surprise and delight her. The prophecies of acquaintances about the futility of this relationship did not come true, including the predictions of Camilla. Or did they? Could this be the moment Jessica recognizes her husband from a different perspective? Why is he out on the street at this hour? Alex should be at home looking after their sick son. What's he doing here? Probably rushing to meet that blonde hottie of his Camilla told me about. Now Bridget was going to find out. Her heart pounded, starting to give her a headache. Jessica was used to trusting her husband with everything, and now, following him through the streets of the city, she felt a mixture of the most contradictory feelings: anxiety, excitement, shame, guilt all at once. Jessica didn't understand what her husband Alex was doing in the city center right now, but she knew one thing: he should be at home at this moment looking after little Carl. One of the twins was sick and didn't go to daycare today. Jessica couldn't take a sick day. She was busy at work, with reports and an inspection. But Alex could work remotely from home today, which in fact the man was supposed to do now, to work and look after his son at the same time. But for some reason he is here, hurrying down the wide street somewhere, and Jessica follows him to uncover his secret at last. If it was something work-related, Alex would definitely call me, warn me, and tell me, she pondered. Who did he leave Carl for? The baby is only 3. He can't be home alone yet. Besides, he's had a high fever since this morning. No, Alex is a sensitive and caring father. He adores his children and would never leave any of them in danger. Surely someone is with Carl right now, a nanny or grandmother, Alex's mother. But why doesn't Jessica know about this? And why was Alex suddenly here, in the center of town? His company's office is about 10 kilometers away, and Alex looks kind of weird. The man always goes to work in trousers and a shirt. There is a strict dress code. Now Alex was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Jessica couldn't remember these things in her husband's wardrobe. Either something new, or on the contrary old and therefore long-forgotten clothes. Strange, of course. Alex never liked jeans and t-shirts. He preferred other, not brightly colored things. Right now he was wearing an orange polo. It was even more confusing. Jessica followed her husband's footsteps, noting more and more strange details, tattered trainers of an unknown brand. Strange, her husband Alex favored name brands. Not out of snobbery, no, that was not in the man's character at all. Despite his high earnings and brilliant career, just branded quality things were more comfortable for him. Where did he get those sneakers from the market? And in general, Alex looked different, a different look. Light stubble on his usually smoothly shaven face and tiredness. But of course it was Alex's push. Jessica would have recognized her husband in any image, the easy gait, the beautiful swarthy skin tone, the bright turquoise eyes that had once turned her head. She still admired them often. Alex kept walking forward, Jessica behind him. Why was he traveling on foot? His husband usually traveled by car. He wasn't particularly fond of walking. Jessica was already late for work. She'd left the office at lunchtime to get something to eat. Suddenly noticed her husband and, of course, hurried after him. It's no big deal, she thought. I've warned Camila. I'll think of something to say to my superiors. It's not the first time friends help each other out. Camila will cover. There's nothing to worry about. Finally, Alex turned into one of the restaurants, which were plentiful on both sides of the main street. Jessica froze. In her head again and again Camila's words that she had seen her husband in a cafe with a beautiful blonde. A friend, a colleague had told her about it just the other day. Jessica then was sure that Camila was mistaken. After all, she at one time until the last did not believe that Jessica with Alex everything will work out. Her friend had repeatedly said that out loud. Camila's own experience showed that it was simply impossible. Alex was handsome, promising, wealthy, young and free. And she, Jessica, too, of course, beautiful. You can't argue with that. But she's still a different kind of bird. Jessica lives in a cramped one-room flat inherited from her grandmother. She works in a small firm as an economist for a pittance. And most importantly, she's raising her daughter alone. Who needs someone else's child? Does the prince need a woman with a burden? Camila questioned. So go for a walk. Meat will do. I wouldn't count on a serious relationship if I were you. Her colleague's words sounded quite logical and convincing. Indeed, why would Alex want someone else's child? And his parents would probably be against it. Jessica hadn't met her parents-in-law yet and couldn't imagine how happy they would be for Jessica and her daughter Lillian. Still, meeting Bernard had a positive side. He'd given her a beautiful, healthy daughter. And then he was gone. Just vanished from Jessica's life. The commitment of family life was weighing on him. The bloke wasn't ready. Well, it's hard to blame him for that. It was Jessica's decision to keep the baby, and it wasn't an easy decision to make. Jessica still shuddered at the desperate situation she found herself in almost 13 years ago. She was just a few steps away from making the biggest mistake of her life. The logical and easier thing for her to do at that time was to have an abortion. It's a blessing that a very young Jessica didn't. Lillian is now 12 years old. Tall, slim, big-eyed. She looked like Bernard, but no one was upset about it. Bernard was a real beauty, dark skin, almond-shaped eyes, shiny black hair. He had a touch of Oriental blood in him, high cheekbones, well-defined lips. All this was passed on to Lillian. She was already a teenager, a young girl. When Jessica went out with her daughter, she often caught glances from boys and even older boys. Just a little more, and her daughter would blossom into a beautiful girl. The thought that she might not be there at all sometimes sent shivers down Jessica's spine. When her grandmother died, Jessica was left all alone. Jessica had been an adult for a long time, 20 years old, after all. But in fact, the girl felt almost a child. Her grandmother always took care of her, cooked delicious dishes for her granddaughter, calmed her down, even woke them up in the mornings at the university. She surrounded Jessica with care and love, like a warm, cozy blanket. And now the girl was unbearably cold, homesick, and scared. Jessica missed her grandmother desperately. She cried a lot during that difficult period. In public, of course, kept to herself, but at home she gave vent to her feelings, sobbing, wailing, pouring out her grief. The realization that she was all alone frightened, and even panicked her. How can you live in the world if no one wants you or cares about you? Jessica needed a shoulder to lean on, a friend, a loved one. And that's when she met Bernard. The dark-haired, good-looking guy worked part-time as a janitor on her property. Always cheerful and smiling, energetic and agile, a total positive. Jessica noticed, of course, that the young janitor looked back at her when she came home from the steam. But guys like that, they probably don't miss a skirt at all. After a while, Bernard began to greet Jessica and smile broadly at her. The girl could not remain sad, and sad at such moments Bernard smiled too infectiously. No one could resist. Somewhat imperceptibly, the girl developed a liking for this guy. Their relationship had grown to the point where they sometimes talked about things around the house. Now, Jessica knew that Bernard came here from the village. His family was there. He served in the army, went to college, but he didn't have enough money. His parents were poor, to put it mildly. So he works part-time. Bernard also knew a lot about Jessica, for example, that she lived all alone and studied at a prestigious university in economics. One day, Bernard asked Jessica out on a date. The girl was taken aback by such an offer. Bernard was clearly very embarrassed, blushing, stammering, looking under his feet. It was not at all like the conversation of a cheerful young man, and so it looked especially sweet and touching. Of course, Jessica agreed. Bernard had no money, so the young people went to the seafront. They walked, talked, held hands, then kissed. Jessica felt more and more attracted to Bernard. He was so nice, so interesting. He'd just turned 22, but he'd seen and learnt more in his years than Jessica had ever dreamed of. Her life was relatively calm and prosperous, while Bernard had to work from the age of 11 to help his family, go through the army, get into serious trouble and get out of it. Bernard's life was a constant adventure. At home at the entrance, the girl suddenly realized that she did not want to part with him at all, but she didn't dare to invite him back to her place. Then she didn't dare. Later, Bernard did move in with her, and Jessica was happy with him for a long time, almost 2 years. Bernard masterfully fried potatoes and eggs, cleaned the flat in a flash. All this guy did much better than Jessica, whom her grandmother raised like a princess, protecting and pitying. He also knew how to fix taps and repair furniture. Life had taught him all that. Most of Jessica's time was taken up with her studies. Bernard was not particularly in need of science. He was listed in the construction school, but almost never appeared there, preferring to earn money. But that wasn't so good either. Casual earnings, part-time janitor's salary, and Jessica's social scholarship, that's all the components of the budget. I had to cut back on everything. It was a little frustrating for the guy, as he wanted a beautiful life. But Jessica was happy, as it was the main thing, was that there was a loving person around. Bernard was so sensitive, so understanding. He always knew when Jessica needed support and provided it. The guy was never stingy with words and generously bestowed the girl with compliments that made her melt. Bernard often went out with his friends without Jessica, and she didn't seem to mind. She had no time to go out anyway, because she had a lot of projects to do at school. Sometimes, though, Jessica was jealous when she saw Bernard going out with his friends. What if there are other girls there? Bernard is so handsome, so outgoing. Who could resist him? But the guy assured that he does not notice anyone but Jessica, and he does not need anyone at all. He's happy as he is. It's just friends, guys, sit around, talk. It's like a holiday for us guys, you know. Jessica nodded, but still stayed home with a restless heart. Her intuition told her that not everything was as smooth as Bernard said, but the girl consciously silenced that weak inner voice. 2 years flew by like a day. Jessica was already in her final year. Bernard was also finishing his technical school. Soon they would both be professionals, they would be able to get jobs, and then, finally, there would be no need to save money on the essentials. Maybe they could even go to the seaside. That would be marvelous. One February morning, Jessica realized she was expecting a baby. Of course, she and Bernard hadn't planned any children yet. Why should they? They were still on their own 2 feet, barely scraping by. But an unplanned pregnancy isn't an isolated incident. It happens all the time. Jessica's not the first, and she won't be the last. People manage somehow. And yet the girl was scared. She even had sweat on her back as she looked at the 2-stripe test she'd taken to know for sure. How will Bernard react? He'll probably freak out at first too. But he's such an all-rounder, such an experienced bloke, he certainly won't be confused. He'll say it'll be all right. We'll support, as always. We'll smile his trademark smile. and Jessica will immediately feel calm. Except Bernard's reaction was quite different. A baby? The guy even staggered away from Jessica upon hearing the news. What baby? Are you sure? I'm sure. 2 tests came back positive. Jessica nodded. Of course, she understood everything perfectly well. But what could she do if this little man was already living under her heart? The girl felt disappointment and resentment. It seemed to her that Bernard's reaction would be quite different. You have to get money to live on somewhere, the boy said, as if he were talking to himself. Should I borrow it from Andrew? Jessica was startled when she heard the dreaded word. What are you talking about? The girl instinctively grabbed her still completely flat stomach as if to protect it. This was something she had never even thought about. Jesse Bernard pulled himself together and spoke in a gentle but firm voice. You realize we're in no position to be parents right now. What can we give to this baby? What are we doing on our own? We're almost done with our degrees. I could go to work on a construction site. You'll get maternity pay. We'll be fine. Jessica thought it was Bernard who was going to comfort her and say those words. But as it happened, she had to take the initiative. The news of the baby had knocked Bernard out of his depth. Of course, he would be ashamed of his cowardice later, but Jessica never reproached him for those phrases, though it was certainly very hurtful to hear. Bernard had convinced Jessica over and over again that they could not keep the baby. He painted depressing pictures of the future. He said he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. And at some point, the girl gave in to his persuasion. He's right about everything. They have no money, they haven't even got a job yet. They're cramped in a small 1-bedroom, and there's a baby. The baby needs a lot of money, nappies, medication, clothes, which babies grow out of at breakneck speed. Jessica will not be able to work for a long time, when the child grows up and goes to kindergarten. No one will want such a specialist without experience. Jessica went to the hospital with a heavy heart. In her bag, she had all the necessary things she had been told to take with her: slippers, dressing gown, nappies. Jessica would have to spend the whole day in the hospital. She would not be allowed to go home until the evening, and that was if everything was all right. There was a queue at the emergency room. Jessica sat on a couch in the corner and stared at people for nothing. She was trembling, and she could hardly contain herself. She wished Bernard were there to hold her hand, to stroke her back, to assure her that everything would be all right. But he was off on another part-time job. And rightly so, they need the money. Especially since this month they had to pay a large sum for this very procedure. Next to Jessica sat a woman in her 40s, well-groomed, beautiful, expensively and tastefully dressed. Exquisite manicure, fashionable haircut. Jessica thought she'd like to look like that in 20 years. Except this woman's eyes were very sad. A man approached the woman, probably her husband. You could tell they were a wealthy couple. I've done the paperwork. You'll be called soon. He put his hand on his companion's shoulder. Everything will be fine. For some reason, Jessica immediately thought that this woman also wanted to get rid of an unwanted pregnancy. Her spouse spoke the same words as Bernard. It's going to be okay. Calm down, really. Why would they, people their age, need a baby? An accidental pregnancy, I suppose. What could be good? Jessica's neighbor looked up at her husband. What could be good about this whole situation? 11 IVF protocols. 5 frozen pregnancies. Again, those painful procedures, treatment, recovery, and then on again. You could see that the woman was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. In her companion's eyes, there was so much pain, so much sympathy. He did not know how to help his wife and what to say to her words. So he just hugged her. How stupid I was, almost whispered the woman. I was afraid then that I could not cope. I was just finishing school, ahead of the university career. My son would be 24 years old now. I knew it was a boy. I felt it right away. And now I'm paying for that mistake all my life. Serves me right. I'm right not to have any more children. It's a punishment. The man continued to comfort his wife in silence, stroking her back, her hair, squeezing her palms in his hands. He couldn't seem to find the right words. Jessica looked at the adult couple, eyes wide. She understood everything from their brief dialogue. Long ago, when she was a high school student, This woman had an abortion and now, because of its consequences, she could not have children. She is tormented, worried, spends a lot of money, a lot of time to realize her dream of motherhood. But it doesn't work. Jessica suddenly realizes that she will never get rid of her baby boy. She already loves it, even though it's still just a cluster of cells. That's what Bernard called their baby when he insisted on terminating the pregnancy. Jessica is all grown up now. She's almost finished university, just a little bit away from graduating, with her degree in her pocket and Bernard by her side. Jessica's not alone. Together they'll make it. The girl ran out of the clinic as if chased by a pack of dogs. People looked at her in surprise. Once outside, Jessica breathed a sigh of relief. She felt as if she had just escaped a major disaster. Jessica put her hand on her stomach and smiled. Her baby was with her, and that girl. In that moment, Jessica clearly realized that what she had under her heart was not just a cluster of cells, but her daughter loved, beautiful, healthy. They would meet in 7 months. Bernard appeared unfazed by Jessica's story. "But it's not serious at all," he said. "I'll take you to the clinic tomorrow. You shouldn't have gone." It was the first time they had fought. Jessica insisted. Bernard argued that she was wrong. His arguments had seemed so logical and right before. Now Jessica wondered how she had ever agreed with them. "Yes, it will be hard for a while," she said. "But we're both very mature. We can handle it. I can't take that step." Finally, Bernard slammed the door and walked straight out into the dark March evening. Jessica thought he'd cool down, come back to apologize. After all, Bernard had always understood her so well before. The same would happen now. But Bernard didn't turn up until the morning. Drunk, aggressive, he again insisted that the child must be disposed of. "I have the right to decide this too, and it concerns me." It was now impossible to change Jessica's mind, and the boy quickly realized this. He was a good judge of people in general. They hardly spoke to each other during this period. Jessica asked the guy some questions, but he didn't dignify her with answers. He only came home for the night, and not always. Jessica hoped that time would pass and the man she loved would get used to the idea that he would soon become a father. Everything would be all right. They had such a warm and close relationship. Of course, they'll reconcile sooner or later. Bernard will realize everything. He'll be ashamed. But one day, coming home from university, Jessica found that Bernard's things were gone, as well as Bernard himself. Jessica realized at once. She had hoped in vain that the boy would support her. She'd been wrong to think that he just needed time to get used to the situation. Bernard wasn't going to take responsibility for the baby. And he wasn't likely to love her, Jessica, that much. Not at the time. Much later, the girl suddenly realized that Bernard was using her, living in her flat. Renting in their town wasn't cheap. Bernard's earnings were clearly not enough for such an expensive pleasure. Besides, Jessica took care of him, cooked for him, washed and ironed his clothes, cleaned. Bernard lived on his own. At first, he amazed Jessica with his culinary talents and housekeeping. But then constant fatigue from supposedly hard work, things at the technical school and outings with friends. Somehow Jessica took the whole household on her shoulders. She was happy that she was doing something for the person she loved. And yet Jessica tried to find him. How could it be? Gone. Vanished. Didn't even say goodbye. That's not right. Anyway, the baby I'm carrying under my heart, his baby, who needs a father. But it turned out that Bernard had been expelled from the technical school almost 2.5 years ago. That's the news the girl gasped. So under the pretext of studying, Bernard was spending time somewhere unknown. Wow, what a masterful deceiver he is. He told me so convincingly that he was going to his classes, while he himself. A bloke from the technical school, when he heard Jessica was going to find out about Bernard, came to her. "Are you looking for Bernard?" he asked. Jessica nodded. "Well, that's what I thought. It's a rare name. I don't think we've had many Bernards go to school here. Tell me what happened." He was head over heels in love. Then he borrowed a good sum of money and ran away. No, the shocked girl shook her head. "He just disappeared. We lived together for almost 2 years. Everything was fine. Lived in your flat. Probably at your expense, the guy chuckled. Jessica suddenly realized that the guy was right. Bernard earned, of course, from time to time, but he spent his money mostly on himself. Stylish clothes, gadgets, Jessica was bought occasionally inexpensive flowers or fruit baskets. The girl was so happy with this attention and so happy to have her favorite person around her that she just didn't notice the obvious. "The fellow's right," she murmured thoughtfully. "Indeed, Bernard has been living off me. If you look at the situation soberly." "Something like that, but not quite," Jessica countered. "Really, not quite. Bernard sometimes cooked nice dinners, fixed things around the house, always wondered how you were doing. If you put it that way, he gave something too, not just took." "Not exactly," the boy murmured thoughtfully. "Well, anyway, be glad he's out of your life. He's an opportunist. A clinging fish. A beggar from the village, unwilling to study and work, but dreaming of a beautiful life." From the outside, it was clearly visible how he tried to make friends with guys from wealthy families and daughters of wealthy parents in order to pull resources from them. At first, he still succeeded, but then everyone in the technical school realized who he was, and his tricks did not pass here anymore. But there are plenty of majors outside the college, so Bernard went hunting elsewhere. He was expelled from here for failing in his studies. Jessica flapped her eyes, trying to digest what she'd heard. "But I'm not the daughter of rich parents," she said. "Quite the opposite. I have a flat, a steady source of income." Jessica thought and nodded. "Well, I'm sorry, but it's written all over your face that you're naive and inexperienced. It's easy to fool a girl like that. Bernard didn't have a place to live. That's why he picked on you. He's been living in a safe haven for a while, never mind not being able to pay the rent. I'm sure all this time he was still on the hunt." Jessica thought for a moment. Yes, indeed, Bernard was often disappearing with some friends of his that the girl knew nothing at all about. Perhaps the bloke was right, and now he'd probably found someone more suitable. So he's gone and left her. You should be glad that Sponger's gone. And if he ever shows up after another failure, chase him away. Don't even let him on your doorstep. That's my advice to you," said the boy. Jessica didn't believe the guy, because it was very hard to realize that the person you were so in love with wasn't who he said he was. Overcoming her natural shyness, Jessica interviewed a few more people. She chose the older ones, seniors, almost graduates, and yes, some of them remembered Bernard. They spoke of the young man in much the same way the first guy had. Jessica returned home feeling upset, as if the ground had been knocked out from under her feet. Jessica had had a different picture in her head for 2 years, beautiful, bright, right? But it turns out Bernard was using her. When he found out Jessica was pregnant, the cunning chap realized what this was all about. Liability, child support, a screaming baby, and a tiny one-bedroom, problems for life. Or at least for the first 18 years after the baby is born. Too expensive a price to pay for free housing and not so luxurious munchies. So he ran away. He's probably out of town too. No one's keeping Bernard here. Then Jessica thought about the baby, how she'd raise it. Would she be able to handle it? Would she be able to pull it off? She couldn't know that. But she realized one thing: even though her situation was desperate, this child would still be born to Jessica. There wasn't a soulmate in the world. And here was a daughter. Jessica felt she was going to have a girl. Together they would cope with all the troubles of life. And then there was a difficult, very difficult period. Diploma, the last responsible session, state exams. Jessica studied like a curse from morning till night. Jessica didn't think about Bernard anymore. She just didn't have time. And then the toxicosis hit. Jessica was nauseous and nauseous. She felt dizzy all the time. But no one had canceled her exams, and no one was going to make any favors for a pregnant student. Jessica knew one thing: she had to get that diploma. She couldn't leave everything at the finish line, even though it was very hard to study in such a state. Jessica was happy about one thing: in the antenatal clinic, where Jessica registered for pregnancy, she was told at every appointment that everything was going according to plan. The baby was healthy. It was developing as it should. These words of doctors encouraged the girl and warmed her soul. A few months flew by unnoticeably. The diploma is over. The state exams have been passed with honors. Jessica is happy and proud of herself. She's done it. But what's next? The pregnancy was well past the first half. The belly was still barely visible, just a slight hint. but no one around her had any idea that Jessica was expecting a baby. After defending her diploma, the dean unexpectedly invited the successful student to his office. Jessica was a little surprised by this, went up to the first floor and knocked gently on the door of the dean's office. "Come in," she heard. Jessica saw Jeffrey behind the desk. Always stern and serious, he was smiling broadly now, a cheerful sparkle in his eyes. "You're a great student," he began the conversation. "Your grades have been good all year, and you did well on your final exams. That's why I recommended you to the plant recruiters. They're in need of bright young economists. You know how much they pay." Of course, Jessica knew. She never dreamed of ever getting a job there. Those who worked at the factory lived in huge new flats and houses and drove expensive cars. In their town, the phrase factory worker even became a household name. It denoted wealthy people who could deny themselves nothing. Jessica was even a little dizzy from these upcoming prospects. But then a new life stirred in the girl's belly, bringing her mother back to earth. Who needs an employee with no experience, who in a couple of months will go on maternity leave? It's not hard to hide a pregnancy now. You can hardly see your stomach, so it's not a problem. But you'd still have to come clean and face a lot of accusations and let people down. Jessica wasn't capable of that. When she realized that the job was slipping through her fingers, she almost cried. This job could solve all her problems at once. Jessica really wanted to work, to plunge into practice. That was fate. "Jeffrey, there's something I have to tell you about this offer." Jessica still had a faint hope that everything would work out. The dean was going to say that pregnancy was no big deal. You'll work for a couple of months, go on maternity leave, and then return to the factory. Such a promising economist will wait. But the man, having heard the graduate's confession, exclaimed, puzzled. "But how so? Is it a long term or what? Just such offers happen once in a lifetime. It's a shame to miss the chance. Jessica, you're a good economist, you'll make a great specialist, and I can see you need the money. I know your story. That's why I decided to help." Jessica shook her head negatively. She understood everything the dean was saying, but there was nothing she could do about it. And she would never get rid of the baby, even if she hadn't missed the deadline yet. The girl walked home and sobbed to her heart's content, ignoring the passers-by looking back at her. It was better that the offer had never happened. Such prospects, a completely different life. It was hard to turn down a place like this. But Jessica didn't want to cheat, and she couldn't let people down. It wasn't in her nature. Besides, Jeffrey said that she wouldn't have been able to do it, because when hiring employees of the plant undergo a medical examination. So as it happened, it happened. At home, Jessica calmed down, pulled herself together. She's having a baby. She needs to be strong. In addition, before the birth of a daughter, it is necessary to solve a lot of issues. The first financial difficulties were not far off. Now Jessica will not receive a scholarship. She will not be taken to work, either a girl who is about to go on maternity leave. But it's a job in her specialty. And there are other jobs. They do not require high qualifications, and sometimes even official registration. They don't pay much. But Jessica needs something to live on. Not only just to live, she will have to save some amount of money not to work during the period when her daughter will be a baby. Yes, the state provides some allowances for children, but Jessica has already learnt that they are paltry sums. You can't live on that. So Jessica, an excellent student, went to work as a cleaner of entrances in the same homeowners association in which Bernard had once worked as a janitor. The girl cleaned the stairwells in the early morning and late evening, when there were not so many people. The pay was good. By Jessica's standards, she had enough to live on, and managed to save a little. Of course, she didn't get rich. But after her grandmother was gone, she was used to saving money, so she didn't worry. Especially about that. Physical labor suddenly turned out to be the best sedative. Heavy and sad thoughts were somehow washed out of her head. Jessica even felt joy when, instead of a busy staircase, she saw a shining clean platform in front of her eyes. There was something soothing, even peaceful about it. At the same time, the girl was looking for earnings on the internet. She realized that she would not be able to wield a rag for long. The belly was growing by the day, and by the hour, it was simply impossible to hide it. And of course, it prevented her from bending over and stretching properly. and it was dangerous to carry buckets of water, just in case. And Jessica found another way to earn money, even more successful than the last one. And most importantly, a small child was not a hindrance. It turned out that hundreds of thousands of students across the country do not want to write their own term papers and essays. Downloading ready-made papers is not an option. Teachers have long known them by heart. Yes, an online verification greatly complicates the situation. So there was a demand for people who can write such works for money. And Jessica could do it, and she could do it. She even breathed a sigh of relief when she realized that her university knowledge would help her in such a difficult situation. Jessica quit her job at the Homeowners Association because she couldn't clean the entrances anymore, and delved into a new job that she really liked. The girl was afraid that during her maternity leave her knowledge would be forgotten, outdated, erased. But now she would be aware of everything that was happening in the economy. Jessica worked and felt how she was pumping her professionalism. This, of course, could not help but please. The girl managed to save enough money to prepare everything necessary for her baby girl nappies. Nappies for the first time, bottles, overalls, raspipens, bathtub. It turned out that the little man needs so much. Jessica even bought a pram. Not a new one, of course, new ones were very expensive. She took a hand on the announcement of a wonderful transport for the princess's soft pink pram with beautiful flowers on the side. In excellent, by the way, in excellent condition. In due time, little Lillian was born. When the baby was placed on Jessica's chest in the delivery room, the young mum even cried from the accumulated emotions. Now she is not alone. Now she is a mum. It is, of course, very difficult and responsible. But what a joy. The days in the maternity hospital with her little daughter turned out to be an incredibly happy time. Jessica didn't have to work, didn't have to clean or cook. She was invited to the canteen 5 times a day and was provided with clean nappies for her daughter every day. Beauty. Sometimes the girl looked out of the window at the festive discharges arranged for new mums by relatives, balloons, laughter, songs, fun, crowds of relatives and friends, all of them joyfully welcomed the new member of the family, showered mum with flowers. Jessica smiled as she watched these scenes of solemn discharges. But she was sad too, of course. No one was expecting her like this. Lillian was the only one who was excited about Lillian's arrival. But suddenly Jessica was wrong. When the girl with a tight bundle in her arms went to the porch of the maternity hospital, a small crowd was waiting for her. There were a couple of classmates, a few colleagues from the Homeowners Association. They were all smiling. There were flowers and balloons too. Jessica almost cried with excitement. The girl was put into a taxi and sent home. Her friends accompanied her to the flat. Someone had to carry balloons, flowers, and packages with gifts for the baby. So Jessica had a solemn discharge. And then began the everyday life of a young mother. Jessica got used to her new role not as easily as she had planned before giving birth. Sleepless nights, inexperience, unpredictable behavior of her daughter, and fears. With the arrival of the baby, Jessica had new fears that she could not even think of before. What if Lillian chokes while feeding? What if the rash on the baby's body is a symptom of a terrible disease? Why is her daughter crying so much? Maybe she needs medical attention. Jessica also had to work because her child support was so low. There were times when the young mom had to cradle her daughter with one hand and write another term paper with the other, because the deadline was looming. Jessica slept very little during this difficult period. There was absolutely nowhere to wait for help. That's why she had to deal with the child herself, and work, and keep the house clean. After all, it was still necessary to go to the clinic and walk with the baby every day. Jessica lost a lot of weight. She had deep shadows under her eyes at that time. She sometimes didn't even have time to clean herself up for the day. In the morning, she would twist her long, disheveled hair into a bun at the back of her head, hoping to make it up later, but she remembered to do it after midnight. And yet, despite all these difficulties, Jessica never once regretted her decision to keep the baby. Jessica, on the contrary, looking at her daughter Lillian, sometimes horrified at what she could do. After all, she had already come to the clinic, she had already taken the cue, she had already decided on a terrible deed. She wondered what would have happened if she hadn't heard that woman's conversation with her husband. She never had such thoughts again. Now she didn't even want to think about it. Lillian grew up a calm, trouble-free child. She had everything on time. Her teeth grew in when she needed them, and she sat up as planned. And she started school early. Jessica had no one to have a word with at home. She missed human contact, so she was always talking to her daughter. Perhaps it was because of this that Lillian spoke at an age when other children don't even try to say their first words yet. The mums on the playground, looking at the sensible, pretty little girl, were amazed. And Jessica's heart was overflowing with joy and maternal pride. She has a wonderful daughter, the best happiness that she has. At the age of 2, Lillian went to kindergarten. By the way, the girl quickly got used to the new place without tears and tantrums, as if she understood that there was no other way out and did not create unnecessary problems for her mother. Lillian was not even sick during the adaptation period like other children. Having realized that her daughter was adjusted, Jessica started looking for a job in her specialty. Earnings on the internet, this of course is good, but still the money is small and unstable. The young mother had to save on everything, and so wanted to buy toys and beautiful dresses for her daughter, and sometimes pamper herself. It was not for nothing that Jessica studied for 5 years. It was time to look for a job in her specialty, no more red diploma on the shelf to dust. Of course, Jessica faced difficulties. An employee with no experience, and even with a small child in her arms, did not want to take. Now endless sick days will begin. We know you, young mums, but Jessica Perry, my daughter, attends the garden for a long time and does not get sick. There's no problem with that. Jessica heard the same thing in every interview. You all say that, but you're not the right person for us. We need someone with experience. You can't do it. Jessica went to interviews like she was going to work and was met with the same rejections everywhere. It baffled her. Where am I supposed to get experience if they won't hire me without it? She once asked a recruiter bluntly. The woman was confused for the first few seconds. That's not my problem. And yet one day luck smiled on the girl. The furniture repair company urgently needed an economist. Salary offered low, so the queue of applicants for this position was not lined up, and the person was needed right now. So Jessica was hired, despite her lack of experience and the presence of a small child. It was not up to such subtleties. Jessica quickly proved herself. She did her work diligently, had time for everything, and also gave her ideas on how to improve accounting. The girl finally got to work in her specialty. The management, of course, quickly appreciated her zeal. The young employee was respected and her salary was even raised. We need such enthusiasts, the boss often said. These praises gave Jessica a pleasant warmth in her soul. A bonus to her favorite job and a good salary was communication with a team of adults. How much the girl missed it all. For 2 years she talked only with her little daughter Lillian. And hear jokes, joint tea parties, exchange of news and opinions. Jessica missed it all. In the same firm she met Camilla. They were almost the same age and therefore became fast friends. Camilla often came to visit Jessica and invited her to stay with her. The girl was still living with her parents, so they had a lot of common topics for conversation. True, the opinions of friends on some issues differed, because of which sometimes there were heated arguments. But it was also very interesting and exciting. Life had settled down. Jessica was working, getting good money. Now she didn't have to skimp on food and clothes. Jessica even managed to save up for a summer trip to the sea with Lillian. Luckily for the young mother, Camilla volunteered to go with them. It was a wonderful holiday, which was repeated several times afterwards. Lillian was a joy to behold. She grew up a beautiful girl, very similar to Bernard, but the character and learning abilities of the girl went to her mother. Lillian quickly and effortlessly learned to read, write, and count before school. In kindergarten, she always went with a book. She also drew beautifully. Jessica couldn't get enough of her treasure. But Camilla's personal life was not going well at all. She often went on dates, had easy romances, and then shared with her friend over a glass of wine another disappointment. Maybe I don't need them, these men? Maybe they are all really arseholes. Yours left you with the baby and ran away. I don't know what to say. Jessica shook her head. You know I don't have much experience with these things. Maybe you're right. But Jessica didn't really think so. She knew there were many wonderful men in the world, kind, brave, caring. She just didn't want to argue with Camilla, who was already upset. Of course, Jessica sometimes thought about the fact that she needed her own man, a reliable support, a wall behind which you can hide from the hardships of life. Because pulling everything alone is very hard. There is no one to share her worries with. She herself would be happy to take care of this man, would surround him with love and care. And Lillian would have a father who would walk with her on the street and carry the girl on his shoulders. Risks were in short supply. Jessica, after all, saw with what eyes her daughter saw of the father-little-daughter couples. She didn't say anything out loud. She didn't want to upset her mom. But Jessica had noticed it all herself. But where to find him, such a prince? And when homework, daughter. Jessica didn't go out much. Sometimes, of course, Camila took her out to a bar or a cafe. Lillian was old enough to spend a few hours alone. But still, the woman's heart wasn't in the right place during that time. She kept thinking about how her baby was doing. She couldn't relax. "Why are you spinning like a frying pan?" Camila was angry. "Look at the cool guys at the next table looking at us. They're about to meet us." "You know, I should probably get going," Jessica replied. "You always do." Camila shook her head resentfully. "Just when something interesting starts, you run right away." Camila could not fully understand her friend. She herself had not had children yet. She had no idea what it was like to worry about her child. And she didn't know about the worries associated with a child either. By the way, Camila is still single. She has occasional stormy romances, but they all end the same way. The woman is again disappointed in the next beau. Or he himself, without explanation, disappears over the horizon. When Alex appeared in Jessica's life, she initially did not even want to talk about it to her friend. She had just gone through a difficult breakup and was in upset feelings. And here was Jessica and her happiness. And the perceptive Camila figured it all out. "Are you seeing someone?" "Well, sort of." "How did you know?" "Your eyes gave you away." Camila grinned. "Come on, spit it out already. Who is he? How did you meet him?" Jessica had to tell her friend then. She didn't mind, though. She wanted to share the story with her friend. Especially since the story really did seem like a fairy tale. Jessica always came home at the same time. She would drive from work to school and pick up Lillian from after-school care. Together they would go shopping and then slowly, unhurriedly walk back to their house. Mother and daughter shared the news of the day, discussed plans for the evening. It was a wonderful time. That May evening. At first it was business as usual. Lillian was in a happy frame of mind. A long holiday, a school camp, and a present from her mother for the excellent completion of the first grade. The girl walked beside Jessica, and Jessica smiled, bouncing with the feelings that overwhelmed her. She didn't think to pull her daughter back. Let her have her own fun. And then a man approached them, handsome, young. Expensive brand-name clothes gave away his social status. He was looking straight at Jessica and approaching her. There could be no doubt. "Hello, a little embarrassed," said the young man. "You just don't freak out. I just have no idea how to start a conversation. We need to talk." "At least I certainly do." Jessica looked dumbfounded. Lillian looked at the stranger curiously, but without fear. The woman thought she was setting a bad example for her daughter. She had taught her so many times not to talk to strangers, and here she was. But on the other hand, there was nothing to be afraid of. A busy street, crowds of people going about their business. They're certainly not in any danger here. And this stranger evokes feelings other than fear or dislike. He's clearly embarrassed, though usually he's probably confident and self-sufficient. This behavior looks nice enough, and in general an open look, a beautiful smile, a calm voice. Jessica suddenly realized that all this attracted her to the stranger. "This is a man you want to listen to." "Shall we go to a cafe?" the man suggested. "I think the girl could use some ice cream." "I wouldn't say no." Lillian smiled at him. "No, that's unnecessary." Jessica shook her head, realizing the man didn't know how to speak in front of a child. The woman sent Lillian away to the nearest playground. Jessica could see exactly what her daughter was doing. The girl was also glancing at her mother, but she couldn't hear her conversation with the stranger now. "So what did you want to talk about?" Jessica asked. The young man introduced himself as Alex and then told her what the matter was. As he narrated, Jessica was surprised, delighted, and tried to hide a happy smile. She felt like the heroine of a romantic comedy. It turns out that Alex dines in this cafe every night after work, and the walls there are transparent, made of thick tempered glass. The man, understandably enough, is looking at the street during dinner. His field of vision includes people hurrying about their business in the evening. Then one day he sees Jessica and her daughter. The easy gait, the kind look in your eyes. You looked at your daughter with such tenderness and looked, well, like Madonna and Child from ancient paintings. I don't know how to explain. Alex was embarrassed and confused. But Jessica certainly understood what the man was trying to say. Don't think anything of the sort, it's just, I understand you're single now, and we could try to meet up sometime. Go for a walk somewhere to socialize. I'm raising my daughter alone. That's true. But how did you figure that out? Just surmised. Alex smiled broadly. It was obvious that Jessica's admission that she was single pleased him greatly. No ring on my finger. Besides, I've never once seen you with anyone. Just you and your daughter. I've been watching you for a while now, haven't I? That sounds frightening, Jessica assured the man. Her heart fluttered with joy. Goosebumps were running up and down her back in droves. The woman tried very hard not to show her feelings and hoped she was succeeding. Do you live here? Lillian and I pass by at this time every day. No wonder you see us all the time. Alex smiled again. Yes, you're right. That's exactly how it worked out. When I see you, I feel so happy, so warm at heart. Well, now I said it out loud. That's why I decided to talk to you. I think you're a wonderful person. Not many people like you. And of course, you're very beautiful. Jessica couldn't help smiling. It had been so long since she had been complimented. It had been so long since she had felt delightful and loved. To see the interest in this man's eyes, to feel his sympathy, it was incredibly satisfying. Then the conversation flowed more easily, more naturally. Unnoticeably, Jessica and Alex switched to you. The man was no longer embarrassed or lost. He told a little about himself, asked Jessica a few questions about her life. The rapprochement happened naturally and easily. A little later, Lillian, who was playing on the court, joined them on the bench. She further lightened the mood with her childlike directness. Somehow it happened that Lillian and Alex immediately found a common language. And then there were meetings, dates, sometimes with Lillian, sometimes without her. Jessica was afraid to believe that she had finally met her man. Alex understood her, accepted and respected her opinion, and was always ready to offer help. Jessica felt that if she approached him with a problem, he would immediately solve it, and even happier that he could help. There were doubts, of course. The story of Bernard was still fresh in her mind, though it had been many years since then. Alex is younger. He has a high position in a big company. His parents are very wealthy, after all. Do they need a daughter-in-law like that? And Alex himself? The man is rich, handsome, virtually flawless. He must have a lot of admirers around him. And the man wasn't exactly hiding it. Of course, I've met many women, but you're different from all of them. You're the best. Sincere and honest, a little naive and gentle. There's probably no one like you anymore. I was lucky enough to meet you by chance. Jessica melted at those words. She already loved Alex with all her heart and felt that he had equally strong feelings for her. But Jessica still couldn't believe that a long and serious relationship between them was possible. People around them were adding fuel to the fire. Camila, the master of disappointing men, was especially trying. Those rich guys, they're always looking for the young and beautiful. I've had stories like that. Travis, for example, you remember him, probably a businessman with a cool car, singing "I love you, I can't" in his ears. And then he dumped her. Married his father's partner's daughter. The usual story. You also there especially do not hope, because then it hurts, prophesied Camila. But things didn't turn out the way she predicted. Alex proposed to Jessica. He looked into her eyes with such anxiety when she was confused by the surprise, wondering what to say. Alex had thought at the time that Jessica was formulating a polite refusal. He had admitted it to her himself later. But the woman just didn't know what to do, because she was confused and because she had it firmly planted in her head that they were not a couple. "I love you very much, you know," Jessica finally uttered. "But won't you regret it later?" After all, we're far from being equals. And I have a daughter, you know." "You really think so?" Alex marveled. Then he pulled Jessica tightly against him. "I love you. I don't need anyone else. I'm happy I noticed you once. It's the greatest gift of fate." Jessica developed then from the joy and surprise of the touching situation. It felt good to feel so valued and loved. "Well, what about your parents? They won't mind, will they?" Only now Alex realized his omission, smiling. "I should have introduced you to them a long time ago. Then such questions wouldn't have arisen in principle." Alex's parents turned out to be incredibly nice and smiling people. They welcomed Jessica and Lillian so warmly that the woman had no doubts. Alex is not lying. He really wants to be her spouse. Everything will be fine with them. "Children are a great blessing," smiled Kimberly, Alex's mum, looking fondly at Lillian. "She's such a beauty. You have a very good girl." And Lillian reciprocated Alex's parents' affection. If Jessica at first was shy in the company of her mother-in-law, her 7-year-old daughter immediately found a common language with them. She needed her grandparents so much. And Kimberly and Jonathan had long dreamed of grandchildren. And then there was the wedding. Not a lavish gala with lots of guests, but a small family celebration. It was what both the bride and groom wanted. After the wedding, the newly married family Jessica, Alex and Lillian flew to the warm sea. It was a wonderful joint holiday full of sun, fun, pleasant surprises. And then family life began in Alex's large flat. Life somehow quickly settled down. Everything fell into place. After only a couple of months, Jessica felt like it had always been like that. 2 years after the wedding, the family was enriched with 2 new members. Jessica gave birth to twins. Carl and Michael were so funny, so cute. They quickly became everyone's favorite. Kimberly, Jessica's mother-in-law, loved fussing with the babies. The happy grandmother came to the flat of the young family almost every day at first to help her daughter-in-law. After all, 2 babies at once, this is no joke. Often she was accompanied by her husband, Jonathan. He also loved the children and always invented some fun games. When Grandpa came to visit, there was always squealing and laughter in the flat. Jessica enjoyed these visits. Alex turned out to be not only a wonderful husband, but also a caring father. And the man made no distinction between Lillian and his sons. He paid equal attention to all of them. When time passed, the boys grew up and went to kindergarten. Jessica was finally able to return to work. Of course, there was no need for money as before, but the woman loved what she was doing. Besides, she liked the team and socializing. She didn't want to become a housewife at all, although Alex had suggested it to her more than once. Jessica explained her decision to her husband, and he, as always, understood her. She and Alex have been together for 6 years now. These years have changed Jessica a lot. She became more calm, more feminine, more peaceful. How could she not be when she's with someone she never dreamed of? He's so unbelievably good at everything. But now Jessica suddenly runs through the streets of the city after her ideal husband, who apparently is in a hurry to meet his mistress. The woman did not believe Camila's words when she said that she had seen Alex several times in a cafe with a spectacular lady. Jessica felt sorry for her friend. She so desperately wanted what she had: a husband, children, a strong family. Jessica knew that Camila was a little jealous of her and thought that what she said about Alex was either made up or a mistake. But here he is, Alex. Strangely dressed, unshaven, some kind of very tired, going all out, whereas he should be at home with the baby at this time. Here, at last, is the restaurant. The man walked in there. Jessica waited a while to avoid bumping into her husband at the door, then slipped into the establishment as well. The woman chose a far corner table behind a palm tree tub. She could hardly be seen there. It's a cozy vantage point. But Alex, Jessica's husband, was seated at a table against the opposite wall, far enough away to not hear his conversation, but well enough to observe. And yes, Alex wasn't alone. Kimberly, the blonde girl Camila had mentioned, was already waiting for him at the table. She wasn't wrong, it turns out. Indeed, the girl is quite attractive and so attentive, looking at the man, so keen to tell him something. Alex answered one-word answers, looked at the interlocutor with interest, nodded in time with her words. His eyes remained somehow very anxious. Probably he was telling his mistress how he was fed up with life with his wife and 3 children. maybe even complaining that he had to carry someone else's child. All complexes and stereotypes, once tortured, have long been hushed up, but suddenly they have risen again. Only heads were raised. Jessica was desperately jealous of Alex for this talkative beauty. And it also hurt. It hurt that those around her, including Camila, were right. A man like Alex would never be happy with a woman like her, Jessica. He needs someone brighter, more presentable, like this blonde. Alex suddenly lowered his head as if he heard something sad or frightening. The blonde put a hand on his shoulder. A gentle, soothing gesture. The man covered her palm with his. They smiled at each other. Jessica's eyes darkened with emotion. If before this conversation could be written off as a business conversation, now it couldn't be. Alex suddenly got up from his seat and moved towards the smoking room. That seemed strange, too. Alex had never smoked and generally kept to a healthy lifestyle. Jessica did not miss the opportunity to follow her husband. Now she would talk to him, ask about the blonde. Jessica does not intend to wait for the evening, and in such a situation, the man will be confused and will not be able to come up with an excuse or lie on the fly. The surprise effect. Seeing Jessica, Alex glanced at her indifferently at first. Something was wrong with him. Something subtly unfamiliar slid into the features of the man he loved. Was he so changed by the company of his mistress? And how can he remain so calm when he sees his wife at this very moment? Jessica fixed her gaze on the man. An angry look. Alex raised his eyebrows in surprise, looking at her face, and suddenly there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. It was as if he remembered Jessica and recognized her at last. The situation was becoming more and more incomprehensible. "Alex, can you explain to me what's going on here?" Jessica didn't expect her voice to shake as tears came to her eyes. "You must be Jessica," Alex smiled embarrassedly. Only now the woman noticed the deep old scar on the man's temple and the tattoo on his arm. Also, the man seemed to be thinner than Alex. "Who are you?" Jessica exhaled. She swayed and grabbed the ledge of the wall to keep from falling. The man immediately supported her with care. His movements, his facial expressions, his facial features, everything was exactly like Alex's. And yet it wasn't him. Now, finding herself very close to him, Jessica could see. It was perfectly clear. "It's probably for the best," the man smiled. "I didn't know how to tell you about myself, even though I found you almost a month ago. I've been living in your town all this time. Bridget and I. She's a private detective. By the way, she's the one who helped me with this search. She and I have been gathering evidence and proof. There's no doubt now. Now comes the hard part. Dating." "I don't understand anything," Jessica said. It's not surprising. The story is so unique in its own way. Any Indian film could top it. "I thought you were my husband." "That's understandable. I mean, Alex and I are natural copies of each other. Twin clones. My husband is the only child in the family," Jessica objected weakly. "If Kimberly and Jonathan had other children, they would have told me about it. You knew it had taken a long time for the elderly couple to become parents. Alex is a very late and long-awaited child, and he was born alone. I suggest we go to the table. Bridget and I will tell you all about it." Jessica nodded weakly. The blonde raised her eyebrows in surprise when she saw Jessica. But Bridget seemed to recognize her at least. She addressed Jessica by her first name. "This is a truly incredible story," Bridget said. "It will change your husband's life, and yours, of course." It was Bridget who started the story. A man who looked uncannily like Alex, whose name, as it turned out, was Travis, periodically interjected his lines, adding to it, correcting it. In faraway Florida lived a large family: mom, dad, and 4 children. The couple had no education, no parental support. All their property was a 2-room flat in a dilapidated 2-story barracks on the edge of town. It was a wooden building, shriveled by time, an emergency dwelling. But the large family had no other home in sight. There was a catastrophic lack of money. The head of the family worked part-time. Wherever he could, he would plow a vegetable garden, help someone to re-roof a roof, unload a lorry in a shop. In a word, a laborer. In the morning he would go out in search of money, and in the evening he would return often drunk, but without money. The mother of the family almost never worked. She had no time. She was pregnant, or with another baby on her hands. It is a joke. For 6 years of life together, the couple managed to produce 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. It would seem quite enough, given the initial conditions, even overkill. But the mother of many children was of a different opinion. Firstly, the children were paid an allowance. Secondly, having a baby in her arms, you could legally not work. Her husband all dreamed that when the younger ones grow up, his wife will help him in making money for the family. But his other half had other plans. And in general, the woman loved children, especially when they are very young, touching, chubby as kittens, lumps that smell so nice. How could she deny herself this pleasure? In general, contrary to the expectations of the head of the family, my wife got pregnant. For the 5th time, she twisted her arm round my finger, saying something about safe days. Women can do it when they want to. The husband despaired when he learned he was about to become a father again. It was too much to wait for another one. And then there were suspicions that there was more than one child under his wife's heart. Something suspiciously fast-growing belly this time. The mother of many children did not go to ultrasound. There was no money, and she had not registered before. Only to fray her nerves, to go to the counseling center for nothing. No, the lady was already experienced. She knew that it is most convenient to surrender to doctors on the eve of childbirth, but experienced acquaintances unanimously assured twins. The old lady on the ground floor, a former midwife. It was 2 heads in the belly of the pregnant woman felt. Twins. I'm telling you for sure. The neighbor said authoritatively. I'm never wrong. The woman smiled happily, and her husband clutched his head. And twins, too. At that time, the father of many children found a good part-time job tending the bushes in the house of a wealthy businessman, Jonathan. He was famous in town. Every dog knew that he owned a chain of restaurants and cafes. The man was lucky enough to get a seasonal part-time job with him. Jonathan paid well, didn't take any offense. The work was not dusty, simple. And what a magnificent house. And the garden, it was a pleasure to work in it. People lived, but the rich couple didn't look happy. And the new gardener quickly found out the reason. It turns out that the couple could not become parents. It didn't work, that's all. Some kind of health problem for the wife. The father of many children then still grinned to himself. His wife would have such problems. The businessman took his wife everywhere, where she was not only treated, but the result nothing. And such things happen. One day the wife of the owner could not stand it and burst into tears right in the garden. Jonathan clumsily consoled her, trying to find words. It was then that the father of many children had the idea. He waited until Jonathan was alone and approached him with a proposal. You can't have a baby. I've got 4 on the shop floor, and I've got twins on the way. Where can we put them? We can't afford them. So maybe we'll give you the kids at a fair price. My wife hasn't registered with the doctors, so the babies don't even exist on paper. What do you think? Jonathan was outraged at first, shouted at the gardener. But a couple of days later, he called him in for a serious talk. It turned out that the businessman discussed the proposal with his wife, and she happily seized the opportunity to become a mother of newborn twins. That evening, the head of the family returned to his native Barak in high spirits. You bet he made such a deal and got rid of unnecessary children. And he'll make money. Besides, at least one of his descendants would live like a human being. The man even envied the unborn twins a little. Lucky kids, but his wife suddenly objected. What do you mean? Give the children away. They are my relatives. I feel them. I'm already waiting for them. I won't give my kids to anyone. Let them take a child from an orphanage, the woman insisted. Children in orphanages are often from dysfunctional families with various health problems. Our babies will be born perfectly healthy. And then, just imagine what opportunities will open before them in such a rich home. And in an orphanage, they'll have a very different life. But my wife was stubborn. No, I won't. I won't give up my children. The husband wasn't about to give up on his plan. He told Jonathan about the problem. He said his wife didn't want to part with any of the children. And then the businessman voiced a plan that could only be implemented by such an influential and rich man. When the time came for the young woman to give birth, 2 twin boys were born in the local maternity hospital. The woman in labor was a little surprised the staff had not shown her so much care and attention in previous times. "Don't worry. It's because you have twins," the midwife reassured her. "Twins always get special treatment. Everything will be fine." But the midwife was wrong. In the morning, the mother of many children was given only one son to feed. The second one did not survive the night, she was sadly told. In fact, the baby had been secretly handed over to Jonathan's family. That was the plan he had proposed to the gardener. That same night, Kimberly also arrived at the maternity hospital, supposedly with contractions starting. No one was to suspect that the baby wasn't hers. She and Jessica were discharged on the same day. Jessica was greeted by her husband and older children, happy with the successful outcome. And Kimberly had a grand discharge with music, balloons, and a guest photographer. No one, except a very limited circle of people, knew that the babies held by these women were actually twin brothers. Those who were privy to the secret kept silent after receiving a round sum of money and a stern warning. That's how it happened, Bridget finished. Alex ended up in Jonathan's family, and Travis was separated from his blood relatives. But not for long. After a couple of years, all the children from that family were taken away by the guardianship authorities. At that time, Travis was already an older brother, and another girl was born. "So I grew up in an orphanage," Travis continued. "I wouldn't say my childhood was very hard. We had a good life, peaceful. We were brought up, educated. I graduated from the College of Mathematics and Computer Science. Now I work as a programmer. I have a family in the capital, a wife, 2 children, a flat. Everything as it should be." Jessica flapped her eyes confusedly, looking at Travis. What a story. Really like a fairy tale. How would Alex feel about it? Good thing she was the first to know she could prepare her husband. It'll be a real shock for him, won't it? And the mother-in-law, they're elderly people. They should be told too, but very delicately. Jessica couldn't decide how to feel about Alex's parents' behavior. On the one hand, it was immoral and illegal. On the other hand, her husband lived in luxurious conditions, not wandering around in orphanages. And the childless couple were happy to have a child. "My mother sometimes visited me at the orphanage," Travis continued. "I guess she loved children, but she was just irresponsible. She brought me cheap candy, stroked my head. We didn't starve at the orphanage, of course, but I waited for those visits and sweets like manna from heaven. Because it is important for every child to know that he is loved." Growing up, Travis did not abandon his mother, helped her with money, tried to treat her. She drank heavily. Because of this, father died early. But the son could not perform a miracle and change his mother. He only had to support her and watch her sink and lose her human form. One day the woman became seriously ill. Liver problems began, not surprising after years of alcoholism. Travis visited his mother in the hospital, bought medicines, but the doctors didn't give a single chance. The days were running out. The elderly woman realized this and one day told her son Travis, the only one of the children who had not abandoned her. This story of twins, a wealthy family and a child given to a childless, wealthy couple. The husband had once revealed the truth to his wife, after another feast, explained where he had suddenly got a large sum of money from back then. More than 20 years have passed, so the woman was not particularly surprised by that story, but of course remembered the story of her husband. She was even happy for her son, who now lived like a prince, without needing anything. She praised her husband for his decision. The mother wanted to find Jonathan's family just to have a look at the other twin. But the businessman and his family moved somewhere almost immediately after they got the baby. Jonathan sold the business, the house, the property, and seemed to disappear. As I found out later, he started a new life in another city, bought a completely different business, settled in a new place. That is, right here, Travis said. Jessica felt a mixture of feelings: surprise, joy, anxiety, and relief. Relief that Alex was faithful to her and not making things up. But what a shock to their entire family. Alex will probably be happy to hear the news about a twin, because he has dreamed of a brother since childhood. It was his only wish, which his parents could never fulfill. "I was happy when I heard my mother's story," too, Travis continued. "She was gone the next day, by the way. If she'd kept quiet, she would have taken that secret to her grave. But now I knew I had a twin brother. And I was determined to find him at any cost. I'd kept in touch with my other siblings all along, all of whom had grown up to be decent people, educated, with families. But a twin brother, your exact copy, your natural clone, that's a whole other thing. Travis hired private investigator Bridget. Bridget got to work and very quickly got on the trail. Jonathan Smith, was that difficult? The girls smiled. They'd moved away from Alex's birth family, of course, but they hadn't done much to cover their tracks. I found them quickly. We've been here for a month now, Travis smiled. We've been looking around, gathering the latest evidence that this isn't a mistake. Although the most important evidence here is Alex's appearance. We're practically identical. Even you and your wife didn't realize it right away. The final proof is ready. There's no mistake, Jessica asked. The next step is for the brothers to meet. That's the step Travis is hesitant to take Bridget's side. And then suddenly you guys came along. It just happened, she said. Well, Jessica smiled. So we'll all have a celebratory dinner tonight. I'll be waiting for everyone at home. I need time to get Alex ready, so come round at 8. You know the address, don't you? Of course we do, Travis answered. Arriving at the call to the little girl, Christy froze when she saw her husband, who left on a business trip yesterday, A4. Christy walked over to the coffee machine to make herself a double shot of hot, strong savior. She had night duty in the ER tonight, and she'd never learned to sleep half an hour between calls. Any rest is just a bother. The nimble nurse Vanessa, with whom the pediatric ambulance doctor has already gone through many difficult cases, about sleep joked. Uncle Sleep has come to me again. He is starving me even on the move. I can't get coffee in me anymore. Energy drinks in bright metal cans, alas, do not save me. And they're disgusting. When the life of a child somewhere in their city held on the edge, balancing on the edge of the abyss, Vanessa was able to gather so that the doctor only marveled. Iron nerves, iron character, she remembered from her youth, a phrase either from a cartoon or from some. From herself, she mentally added, and a heart of gold of enormous size, which manages to fit love for the whole world. After each return from a call, Vanessa and their driver, Miles, fell asleep with their heads barely touching the cushions on the sofas in the lounge. Their crew chief, Christy, on the other hand, felt everything at her post, always staying fully alert. Christy embraced the still steaming cup with both hands, blissfully sipped her favorite smell with her nose, and thought with pleasure. I'll come home after my shift. I don't need to cook anything. There are a couple of cutlets in the fridge and the rest of yesterday's mashed potatoes. Winston's husband had been away on a business trip since this morning. Free the parrots from cooking for 3 days ahead. The woman stretched her legs out on the coffee table, peering at her assistants. Ashley was dozing sweetly to the peaceful hum of the split system. It had been a sweltering summer this year. The machine had been working like crazy for the past 24 hours. Where did it get its mechanical strength? Miles was sleeping peacefully. Everyone at the ambulance station knew he was in love with Cynthia. But for some reason he was hesitant to confess his feelings to her. The 6'2" big man had been in the hot zone as a contract serviceman. After the injury, Miles lost his wife, who did not want to see in the house of a freak with a scar across the cheek. In the presence of rambunctious Vanessa, the former Miles turned into a timid lamb, stammered when she asked him questions. He would blush if they made unwitting contact. Christy smiled, remembering how her Winston had cut interested circles around her almost 20 years ago. He'd approached her in the park, where she was cramming Latin on a spring afternoon so she wouldn't fail her medical school exam. May I sit down? Is the bench next to you free? The pretty, blonde-haired Christy flashed her gray-green eyes at him and moved her thick briefcase with textbooks closer to her. Why didn't you like the neighboring benches? There are plenty of unoccupied benches. I've always liked that bench in the shade of the chestnut tree. I come here often, said Winston, the burly man, and he turned red all over. Then my arguments are over. You amuse me, girl. Let's get acquainted, shall we? I can't dare to take the initiative myself, and holding out his palm, sweating with excitement, a little frightened, Winston. Winston did not shake Christy's hand. He began frantically wiping the moisture on his light summer trousers. Christy lightly touched his hand with her fingertips and said, "And I'm Christy." For short, Chris. Sometimes my friends also call me Christine. The nickname stuck to me when I was a kid. Winston smiled happily and said, I'd like to earn the right to be called Christina too. I'd like to earn the right to call you Christy too, so I can be your friend. And let's switch to you. Let's do it, replied the girl. Why all the curtsy and ceremony at our age? Christy had to run to the dormitory that day so that she could be fresh in her Latin exam tomorrow. With Winston, they agreed that he would wait for her outside the institute. If she passed the exam, they would go for ice cream and cakes at the Boulevard Patisserie. The red light on the emergency station's console lit up. The dispatcher was quickly recording something on the computer screen while making notes in the work log. Squad, on your way. I've already uploaded the address to Miles on the app. Hurry up. It's a house on the edge of town. Baby's suffocating. Parents can't figure out what's causing the sudden attack. Vanessa quickly threw on her medical uniform and rushed down the stairs from the first floor. Christy, I brought my suitcase. Even had time to slip your file folder in next to it. Let's not waste any time. I have a feeling this is going to be an unusual case. Quickly throwing themselves into the car, which was already parked under the vapors, the friendly trio under Christy's leadership moved on the road. The night city was slowly falling behind the hot heat of the day. It even seemed to Miles that at times the asphalt under the wheels of the old car was melting. But there was no time to think about it, and he drove carefully and quickly. If the road continued to be so deserted, they would get there in about an hour. Christy, sitting next to the chauffeur, thought, I should have put Vanessa and Miles next to each other for that hour. As Miles drove the car at top speed, in the back of the car Vanessa was thinking sad thoughts. She had 30 years of life under her belt, not the easiest. An orphan since the 3rd year of high school. Her family was the rare case where the father of the family, who disliked strange ladies, disappeared from the house one fine autumn evening. And it all started when the woman, the mother of the household, left. Vanessa's mother fell in love with a young chef colleague and followed him to the ends of the earth. Y isn't going for 5 years practically to Alaska as head of production in a newly opened restaurant the edge of geography. After such a treacherous act of his wife, Vanessa's father went off the chain, methodically went through the entire flat, carefully searching for any images of his wife. Torn to shreds wedding photos that stood in a frame on the dresser and in the wall behind the glass, destroyed traces of the mother of little Vanessa in the bathroom. When he inadvertently flicked a view of his wife's forgotten bottle of perfume off the shelf, it shattered with a pitiful crunch against the tile on the floor. And the man stood there and stomped the shards with his feet, as if he had trampled the remains of his love in the bathtub into solid ground. Then the smell of mum was still lingering and persistent. Vanessa was only 10 years old at the time. She still couldn't understand what was wrong with her if her mum left her with her dad without even talking to her goodbye. The word love was unknown to her. Her parents did not show any romantic tendencies. They were reserved and businesslike with each other. Later, analyzing her childhood, or rather what she remembered from it, Vanessa gave herself a promise to raise the chosen one to heaven with her warm affection, not to repeat the mistakes of her parents. The girl's father drowned his longing in a rather peculiar way. He didn't resort to the bottle. He plunged headlong into work. The man who had been abandoned by his wife worked as a plumber. The master was such that to him for a couple of months queues lined up. If it was necessary to install an expensive bathtub or toilet in an elite flat without a hitch, none of the luxurious side, not to scratch no one around even guessed that the miracle plumber set himself a grandiose task to earn fabulous money, fly to his wife to the north, to prove that he was her, the only one favorite man, from which do not run away. In a beautiful tin box from under a walnut sausage, the master collected notes of different denominations, not once even allowing himself to spend a couple of dollars on beer. The bundle grew, became a thick pile, and pleasantly warmed his hands with its heaviness. At this time, the object of his dreams there in the north, having found himself in an unaccustomed environment, did not cope with the cold realities. The tragedy was so trivial that the neighbors, the recently arrived restaurant manager, only shook their heads when they learned that she had decided to walk a couple of blocks home without a company car in the worst blizzard. The mother of little Vanessa was lost in the snowy captivity already after a couple of steps from the sky. Snowflakes descended not smoothly, as she was used to. They came down dark, icy, piercing, like a flock of large birds of prey. They covered her mouth, her nose. She couldn't breathe. Her knees buckled, as if the harsh winter had struck her with a stick. She settled helplessly into the snowdrift. There was no strength to scream, to call for help. When an hour later her husband, who began to worry, did not find her friend at home, organized a search. When the woman was found, she was still alive. She passed away later, quietly. The southern body could not cope with pneumonia. So Vanessa became a half-orphan. But they found out what had happened much later. The criminal story of Vanessa's father himself could easily have been the subject of a detective story. After his wife's sudden escape, he worked like a man possessed for a year. Finally, he'd saved up what he thought would be a strong argument for bringing his wife home. The savings came in handy, but there was no flight from their town to the far north. He had to get to a larger airport by train first. The compartment companions seemed like nice guys. They had elite French cognac in their bag. He couldn't even pronounce its name clearly. He had Ossetian pies from a nearby bakery, a couple of his favorite juicy lemons, a chocolate bar. Vanessa's father had a sweet tooth. It was a hearty dinner. He didn't even realize he was going somewhere. He became sluggish, relaxed, began to tell his new friends the story of his life. Even traitorous tears came to his eyes. When the neighbors offered him to play a few games of fool, he did not even suspect that such a gambling game only in his hands held no more than a dozen times in his life. Therefore, at the remark, "Well, you've got to be kidding. Even with epaulettes you left us. You should play for money, lucky boy. In no time you'll leave everyone here without trousers." Lucky reacted with enthusiasm. Who would give up his money bag so easily? Everyone threw in $1 on the card game. A ridiculous amount just for fun. In front of the eyes of the woe traveler, paper pictures with kings and ladies were spinning like in a mystical trick. You only had time to figure out what to throw on the table once again with a fan of colorful portraits. The first $1,000 to cheerful mates Vanessa's father lost out of pure interest, for a light drive. How did this amount in 1 hour increase 100 times? I couldn't even figure it out. My head felt like cast iron. My eyes were all blurry. For some reason he wanted to sleep. The last thing he heard as he fell into the viscous darkness was, "Ashley, help Winston, he's got his heel on his money bag." Then silence and darkness. For some reason it seemed to him that he was no longer in a compartment sitting on a bed cozily separated by a caring conductor, but was swaying together with the carriage in some narrow metal space. A sharp scraping of something metal, cold wind, wet drops of rare rain in his face. Flight. The body of my father, who had been thrown out of the train, was found a couple of weeks later in a dense roadside thicket, quite by chance, between two settlements near the railway track. In these places even mushroom pickers and holiday makers appeared very rarely. And here a couple of lovers were brought into the forest belt. They rode their bicycles, spent some time alone, without prying eyes, and were about to go home. Attention was attracted by a red rag in the bushes, which turned out to be a colored sports bag. Then there was a long identification of the deceased, search for relatives. That's when it turned out that Vanessa's mum wasn't alive either. Where did the money intended for the restoration of the family go? How did the man end up near the railway line? No one ever found out. There was a man, and then he was gone for nothing. Vanessa, left for the period of her father's departure to the north in the care of a kind-hearted neighbor, was sent by the guardianship authorities to an orphanage. And their new walls, a new life. She was a sociable girl. Other children in the state institution shut themselves off. She, on the contrary, as if opened up to her peers and carers in her studies and in all activities. Vivacious Vanessa, with a mop of blonde hair, brown mocha-colored eyes, and a slim figure, is ahead of the world. Her favorite subjects are biology and chemistry, hobby participation in a series of theater productions. But also in sports competitions, hikes among the girls, the best friend is not to be found. In one of the educational outings, classmate Vanessa stepped on a rusty nail. Bad place, bad wound. Even the gym teacher and the young teacher were confused. It was more than a kilometer to the camp. Blood was gushing from Anthony's wound, scarlet, boiling. Vanessa and the others looked at the wound for a few seconds. Then they couldn't even tell how the fearless girl had made a tourniquet above the injured place from some rope that had come from nowhere, and shouted into the crowd. Write down for Cynthia the time she knitted it and call her. Now. She tore the white cotton shirt she wore into improvised bandages. Quickly get the first aid kit. See what disinfectants I've got, Vanessa commanded. Some aunt forgot to put a fresh batch of sterile bandages in it before the trip. A little later, having recovered from the shock, the gym teacher threw his jacket over the shoulders of the girl, who remained in one thin top. With the help of 2 students, he made a stretcher out of tree branches. The boy could hardly walk on his own, limping and writhing in pain. Already at the orphanage, in the inpatient medical room, Cynthia told Vanessa after the ambulance had left. I've just heard the doctors praise you for the first aid you gave so expertly. You're the one who should be singing an ode to you, not me. The old crow. Didn't you check before the trip that the first aid kit was poorly equipped? Shame on my gray head. Where did you get this professional knowledge, child? Vanessa laughed and replied, I don't know. Firstly, I love films and TV series about doctors. Secondly, it's like someone is sitting inside me and telling me, take this, and do that. That's how it came about by itself. That Vanessa chose for herself the future profession of a medic. It was not by necessity of compulsory study somewhere after the orphanage, but by a great sincere love. The ambulance drove heavily up the slight rise at the end of the alley and stopped in front of the house at 10 7th Avenue. Christy deftly picked up her suitcase and walked briskly to the wicket. Vanessa was already standing behind her, covering her rear, as usual. An old brass bell was visible on the wooden gate. And Christy thought, it's a rarity. It must have been out of commission a long time ago. But the bell did not let her down. It rang loudly in the dead silence of the empty street. Confident footsteps sounded behind the wicket, and the next moment it swung open. A silent scene. The audience might have stood up and announced the neighborhood with a tumultuous, prolonged applause. In front of Christy stood her husband, Winston, who had left on a business trip that morning. On seeing his wife, the husband stammered and whispered, Come in, please. The girl is in the house, in the back room. Christy and Vanessa rushed through the house. Iron hammers rang in the former's head. All the questions later. Right now, it's just the girl and her life. But what does it all mean? Why is Winston here? What has he got to do with this little girl? The anteroom smelled hauntingly of dusty candles piled by the front door. There was a general lack of tidiness that was evidently a constant feature of the place. In the next room were the aromas of yesterday's borscht, which had already passed more than one test, biscuits, and a little cinnamon. The little patient was lying on a small sofa, and a young lady of exotic appearance was rushing around her. Seeing her mummy, Christy was a little confused. Dreadlocks of frightened hair the color of acid fuchsia, eyes thickly lined with black. Bottom jeans with huge fancy scuffs on the knees, top a shapeless t-shirt with a strange pattern on it. The thought fluttered helplessly in my head again. Winston. What is her Winston doing here? A lover of immaculate cleanliness and classic style and dress, he couldn't possibly be here by definition, but he was standing next to her, looking at her with the pathetic eyes of a sick dog. Vanessa felt the ridiculousness of the situation. In a loud voice, she commanded, Stand back. Let the doctor examine the girl. And you, mummy, quickly tell us what's going on. The baby lying on the pillow was so similar in appearance to Winston that Christy's heart almost stopped. Christy listened intently, a heartbeat or two she was sure to miss. It became clear that angina, neurological swelling, had affected her larynx. The girl could barely breathe. There were signs of hives on her face. The little girl involuntarily pulled her hand to the nasty spots, trying to scratch them. Surprisingly, Winston was the one to answer the EMT's questions. It was as if Christy had been poured a bucket of ice water on him, and he seemed to jump right in, too. My daughter and I were at the circus today, he began. There's a touring show with little artists. Ponies. Our little girl is obsessed with horses. In the second act, just as the show started, Cassandra's lips started to swell. And then her face started to swell in front of her eyes. I knew right away that something was wrong. We went to the Circus Medical Center, where my daughter was given some antihistamine. The swelling went away in a flash and we went home. At home everything was fine at first, but then Cassandra started to wheeze. I found some sawdust from the circus arena in her hands. It turned out that when she was being wheeled around by one of the pony horses at intermission, she had picked up a handful of chopped up wooden pieces on the floor, all the while sniffing them to remember how beautiful her horse was. I assume it's a severe allergy. Christy listened to his monologue and couldn't believe her ears. My daughter and I went home. Who is Winston saying all those words about? How can this be? For a moment, rainbow circles swam before her eyes. She met Vanessa's gaze and she realized the doctor wasn't feeling well. Christy was about to faint right in the middle of this small, stuffy room. Of course, Vanessa knew her colleague's husband. Undoubtedly, she realized that her doctor's handler knew nothing about her husband having a child on the side. In a decisive move, the nurse sat Christy down in a chair, waved the cotton wool soaked in ammonia in front of her nose. Only said a few words. Suspected Quinkie's oedema. We'll get her to the hospital. The doctor nodded dejectedly. It's a serious condition, no matter how severe the bronchial spasm. Vanessa was ready. The adrenaline and prednisolone should have bought them time. After the injections, Cassandra's face began to take on a normal color. Vanessa commented, turning to the man. Don't just stand there. Go outside, tell our driver to bring a stretcher. We'll transport the girl to the hospital. We must try to avoid other, more complicated manipulations. I wouldn't want to put a tube in her trachea for a little girl like that. Christy acted like a robot, automatically. She woke up when she and Winston were already in the car, sitting on either side of the girl. Cassandra's breathing was still intermittent, but noticeably evened out. Winston kept his anxious eyes on the child, full of longing. And Christy was reminded of something else. After they had first met and she had passed her Latin exam, their relationship had developed rapidly. Within a week, they couldn't live a day without each other, unconditionally liked by parents on both sides. After Christy's 4th year, they married, moved into the flat of the glorious grandmother Winston. Cheerful old lady rushed to her younger sister in the village, where she enthusiastically engaged in the cultivation of flowers. She could not be lured back to the city. Christy and Winston lived soul to soul. To quarrel or to start something to find out it was not about them. They were always on the same page about everything. Tough Winston worked as a swimming coach at a children's sports school. Christy safely graduated from medical school, was going to residency. But she couldn't decide on a specialty, she joked. I see myself as an ophthalmologist in a white coat, then Aunt Doctor in the office with a mass of shining metal instruments. Fate forced her to make a choice. After defending her diploma, as if by some command from above, now you can, Christy became pregnant. 9 months later, another sturdy little boy, Anthony, was born. Their cat, their love, and their joy. Everything developed as it should. As the happy head of the family often joked. It's time to sit sits confidently, it's time to walk stomp briskly. Christy, at that time a little away from medicine, all tried to spend more time with his son. As if intuition suggested that this carelessness will not last long. Trouble knocked on their family's door when Anthony was 3 years old. Christy's mentor, who had always told the young woman that she had an aptitude for medicine, hinted that in another 6 months she would not be welcome in any medical institution. This profession loves those who do not get distracted and are constantly improving. Even before learning that she was about to become a mum, Christy had changed her plans for her specialization. As future patients, she appointed the youngest infants, newborns. She decided to become a neonatologist, scrupulously studied all sorts of pathologies in crumbs, barely born. She was lost in the pediatric intensive care unit, but then her fervor waned. Anthony took up all her time and thoughts. To return to her chosen field of medicine, Christy had to plunge into the thick of current events of the department, where she found a place for a novice pediatrician. Anthony, the big boy, went to daycare. Winston continued his activities with his charges in the sports section. Everything in their family flowed according to the planned course. A couple of months later, the kindergarten teacher asked Christy to look at her in the methodology room after work. Here she told the boy's mother her observations and concerns. But first she asked, "Do you notice anything strange about your son lately?" Christy raised her eyebrows in surprise and opened her amazed eyes wide. "My husband and I both work very hard. We see Anthony most of the time in the evenings, but he seems healthy and alert. What exactly made you suspicious?" "We were preparing for a matinee in the group. All the folk dances the kids weren't doing right. Anthony, having made another round of the music room with his little partner, stopped abruptly and sat down on the children's chair. I didn't think much of it at the time, but your son started stopping as he walked more and more often. Christy, it seemed to me that his lips were turning a bluish color at this point. And yesterday we had a checkup with the pediatrician from our local hospital. She advised to show the boy to a pediatric cardiologist. I'm a doctor myself, also a pediatrician. I could not see anything in my son," Christy confidently replied to the teacher. And she thought to herself, or could. Without delay, the next day she took Anthony to her home department. The doctor's verdict was overwhelming. "Your son has a rare form of heart defect, which usually manifests itself only by the age of 3 or 4 years. The only way out is an urgent operation, otherwise he will not live for 6 months. His condition will worsen every day. In our city, such a complex surgical intervention is impossible. The experience of such operations has already been gained in New York. Cardiac surgery centers in Germany, Switzerland, or Israel will also be able to cope well with it." Christy and Anthony walked home with slow steps. It seemed that now her boy would get sick and his heart would not hold out. Winston rushed from the sports school as soon as she called him, and Christy kept poring over textbooks, notes, medical literature. It appeared that in their case, a favorable and a fatal outcome were equally likely, 50-50. Where can I find the point that will make the swing go in the right direction? The cost of the rare and complex surgery in New York was fabulous. As time flew by, Christy and Winston were unable to raise the necessary sum. Even selling her grandmother's old flat with her permission and moving into a one-room flat in the suburbs did not even out the balance. When one of the charitable foundations intervened in the seemingly hopeless case, everything moved forward. Finally, the operation and treatment were paid for, tickets to New York were bought, and things were packed. But Anthony died on the operating table. The swing didn't want to lean in the direction of their marital happiness and well-being. There was no negligence, no medical error, no serious preconditions, just the severe illness itself. Christy, being a pediatrician, understood all this perfectly well. But her heart froze the moment the surgeon came out of the operating theater and waved his hands, saying nothing. She and Winston understood everything at once. There was no cry, no sigh. Only they hugged each other tighter. They seemed to stand like that the whole time their son was trying to be saved under the cold glow of the bright lamps. They returned home devastated. Christy kept saying, "It's time's fault. We let it slip away, while we were trying to raise money for the operation. If we'd come to New York sooner, everything would have been fine." Then she took a course to retrain as a pediatrician to work in an ambulance. It became important to her to save at least someone else's baby. That's when she first told her husband her motto: "We are always responsible for everything." Some people just go through life without realizing it. 2 years after Anthony's death, Winston talked to Christy about having a second child. She herself couldn't explain why she felt the way she did now. She didn't want to give birth again, didn't want to have another child. She wanted to devote all her efforts, abilities and skills henceforth only to children in distress, sick, injured, but not her own. Winston accepted it. He did not start any more conversations on this subject, did not hint. He was there for him, his own, dear to his heart. And now, they rode side by side beside his daughter by some strange girl. Christy wouldn't even mentally call her mother. As in a delirium, at the bottom of her soul ruled only one thought: what could her husband and this miracle in feathers have in common? On that distant June day, when Winston wandered through the fields of the local park, it did not occur to him that on one of the benches he was waiting for his fate in the form of a girl with gorgeous gray-green eyes. A lovely beauty who had no equal in the whole world. Pretty as hell in his male sense. She was fiddling with a biro, whispering intently with her lips. She twisted a thick strand of hair on her finger, wrinkled her nose, chewed a sausage sandwich, drinking some drink from a plastic bottle, and turned the pages again. She did it all at the same time, without any confusion about the sequence of actions. Winston fell in love at first sight. His feet brought him to the bench and the girl. And then he was a little confused, so he said the first thing that came into his head, but he did not lose the power of speech. She herself had offered to meet him. She didn't refuse to go with him the next day to the ice cream parlor. In any love family story, there are two faces, two participants, two heroes. If someone were to write down Winston and Christie's memories, there would be two similar stories on paper. They realized they loved and wanted to be together. They were close, they were friendly, they understood each other. Wanted, waited, and then raised Anthony together. Everything was the same, shared. Everything was shared. Together they met a misfortune like no other. The son left, they stayed. Not by the laws of nature, the older outlived the younger. Winston fanatically wanted another child, but Christie closed the subject, perhaps forever. At his sports school, he prepared his pupils so fiercely for competition that two of them first took silver and gold at the city competition, and then distinguished themselves as first in the state and went on to the federal level. Invitations to competitions all over the country came pouring out of the horn. The head coach even hinted that they might be in the running for the National Cup. Christie almost did not notice now his endless trips to all sorts of business trips. She was sure that the adventures on the side of her husband will not look for adventures. They unconditionally remained the closest people who were not spared by grief. Each of them escaped from memories in his own way. That trip to a tempting picturesque resort in Florida, which was in full preparation for the soon-to-be Olympic Games, was unusual from the start. It was still a year and a half before the world's most important competition. Construction was boiling everywhere in the city. The coach and his team even tried out a new hotel and cafe on the embankment, which were designed for guests. Having appeared on a magnificent, beautiful landscape as fallen on the coast, and then also having won in the next competitions, all were going home happy. When buying tickets, the following fact came to light: too many professional people from all over the country were traveling back and forth to Florida at that time. Travel documents became scarce. The coach was forced to buy a ticket in a sleeping car SV. In a compartment for two with a neighbor was a girl, as it later turned out, Megan, a painter. She was going home to the city on holiday. She'd bought her ticket at the last minute too. Brown hair, blue eyes. God had a bit of a brain. She was always talking rubbish. Winston shouldn't have baptized his children with her. Athletic build, well-muscled figure, serious look, inquisitive eyes. Women always liked him, but he wasn't interested in that. He was attached to his burden. By common joys and sad ties. He paid little attention to other ladies, even if they gave him unequivocal attention. The girl in the compartment was about 10 years younger than he was. When he entered, she was eating a pie with potatoes and drinking a Coke. She nodded at the greeting, introduced herself. Terry. I'm going on holiday 9 months almost without a day off. Painter on the objects for a fortnight. The foreman gave me a holiday. Sit down. Why are you frozen like a pillar? We're here for almost 24 hours. This monologue made Winston sit down on the second shelf. The train started peacefully. A beautiful landscape floated outside the window. 10 minutes later, his boys came to visit him and immediately began to tease the coach. Chief, can't we switch places? Such a girl is traveling with you. You won't shame the team's victories on all fronts. Terry was easy. She didn't flirt. She didn't make eyes at him. She didn't flirt with him. She didn't flirt at all. She gave him some cakes, took one of his sandwiches, went to the conductors for coffee for the two of them, waved him off. Some things women are entitled to by status. I'm already 23 years old. I look younger because of my small stature, but I'm already a lady of stature. The passenger train glided smoothly along the smooth tracks. The day outside the window changed to a long black night with few bright lights of stars in the sky. Winston and Terry discussed the latest Hollywood premieres, the mores of show business stars, the beauty of Miami, and then languidly told each other a couple of anecdotes from what they could remember. Then the conversation dried up, and they decided to go to bed. Winston flipped through some railway newspapers for a while. Terry delved into a detective story. Boring. They both lay down on their sides with their backs to their traveling companion and pretended to fall asleep. After half an hour of torment, Winston did doze off. He awoke to hands stroking his shoulders. "Don't be afraid, Coach. You're a brutal man." "Too hard to resist," Terry whispered. Winston twitched on the shelf, stood up abruptly, turned round to face her. "What are you doing, traveling companion?" "I told you I was married." "You've never been away from your wife, Winston?" "Never cheated on her." "Of course you haven't," said the man angrily. But inside him the excitement was already reviving. Terry caught the change in his mood, and then what happened happened. "We hadn't talked much since this morning." "No, I don't want coffee." "Thank you," he said sharply. Since the evening, Terry did not raise her eyes to Winston, as if ashamed. In their own city, they went off to different sides of the platform. His memories of that night were strange. For some reason, he didn't even consider it cheating on his wife. And then the unexpected happened. In the middle of autumn, Winston, as usual, locked the door of the men's locker room, when a security guard called out to him from the lobby. "Winston, there's a girl here looking for you," the guard said. Going downstairs, Winston was surprised to see his traveling companion from the train to Miami on the doorstep of the children's sports school. She gestured for him to pass and said through gritted teeth, "How many partners I've had. But to get pregnant after one time, it's never happened before." "Hey, Coach, abortions are expensive these days. You're going to have to help me out with the money." Winston couldn't believe his ears. He could be a father again. He could have a son or a daughter. He would give half his life for such an opportunity. Quickly grabbing Terry under the elbow, he dragged her around the corner of the building to the summer sports field. There he sat her down on a bleacher near the football field and said loud and clear, "You will bear me this child, and I will be by your side and your husband, his father. Just dare to do anything to harm the baby, you'll be sorry." Terry resisted. "So who are you that I should waste my youth and life on your offspring? You found yourself a surrogate mum, free of charge, and then maybe someone will call me to marry and I'll be with your extra." They sat down again and discussed the terms. Winston in everything helps Terry financially, comes to her at any time at her first request. The baby's fate will be decided after birth. She in return leads a healthy lifestyle for the remaining 7 months, does not do anything that could harm the baby. They learnt about becoming parents of a girl after the next ultrasound. "I didn't want a boy, but a girl. I'll think about whether to keep it or make a present for you, Daddy. Have you already pleased your wife?" Terry sneered. Winston looked at her and thought, how could I have been so weak on the train to be around a woman like that? He kept preparing to talk to Christy, wanting to tell her everything, to apologize, but he hesitated and put off the explanation. Let the girl be born, and then he will confess everything to the woman he loves. Cassandra was born quickly, healthy, without any abnormalities. 5 days later, Winston took Terry from the hospital. Surprisingly, this perky woman treated the baby very carefully and reverently. Whether the maternal instinct woke up, or the fact that the girl was pretty quiet, calm. It was as if she felt that there was some impropriety in her birth. Daddy and Mummy did not live together. There was no normal, in the conventional sense, family around. 3 months after the birth of his daughter, Winston offered Terry to draw up documents for adoption with the subsequent transfer of the baby to him, so that the woman again became free of any obligations. The refusal was unexpectedly abrupt. Moreover, Terry insisted that he did not tell his wife anything, otherwise she would lay down her bones, but she would separate him from Cassandra. At first, Winston was in doubt, wanted to involve lawyers to win back his daughter, and kept a close eye on whether Terry was treating the girl well. There was nothing to fault. She'd even managed to save up a decent amount of money for the baby, so there was no way to get her on the financial hook. As time went on, Winston got used to making visits to his second home, where Cassandra invariably greeted him with a joyful squeal. Sometimes they took walks together. Sometimes they even had lunch or dinner together as a big dad, mum and daughter. Christy was fanatical about her work, taking extra duty, not paying the slightest attention to her husband's absences. But if they were at home together in the rare hours, was almost the same kind, affectionate, attentive. Tired from the night vigil, the ambulance crew pulled up outside the emergency room of the Children's City Hospital. In a moment, 2 burly orderlies were already carrying a stretcher with Cassandra into the examination room. The doctors scurried about, immediately reassuring everyone that the girl's life was not in danger. Christie's mission was over. The girl was delivered without incident. Winston stayed with his daughter. Christie had to go back to the emergency substation. Later, in the evening, her husband would tell her everything honestly about those long-ago events on the train. Christie had almost calmed down by then. I am surprised that she did not consider her husband's brief affair a crime against their family. It was as if she felt all Winston's greed for this girl, in whom his dream of having a child was realized. People have different destinies. In different ways, heaven helps to find the happiness of fatherhood. Things began to look even busier between them. Christie advised her husband on which doll to buy, for the discharge of the girl bought for her sweets, birthday and New Year's gifts. Once only asked Winston why the little girl's mother had such a strange appearance. Winston explained that such metamorphosis with the appearance of Terry began to happen recently. Both of them had no idea at the time what Cassandra's mother's pink dreadlocks in her hair and her affectations would lead to. The thing was, Terry had fallen in love with the new guy on their crew. The man called himself a freelance nomadic painter, painted a portrait of her on the wall during breaks, and then painted over it himself with an even coat of colored paint. Terry had dreadlocks like his, a shade he'd recommended. The free artist didn't ask her out, didn't look languidly into her eyes, didn't shower her with gifts, didn't even hint at a rapprochement somewhere in a secluded corner of the construction site. He beckoned her with his bohemian spirit, his charm, even through the beautifully cut holes in his jeans. Refinement and aristocracy slipped into his every gesture, movement, turn of the head. What wind had brought this unrecognized genius to the construction site? Terry didn't ask herself. She only prayed that this artistic genius would not disappear from their educational horizon on some welcome day. Now she imitated her idol in everything, dressed like her gifted idol, smoked long thin cigarettes like her god, tasted like her prince for lunch rolls and wasabi, for dinner a glass of Italian wine and elite cheese with mold. Cassandra paid less and less attention, pretending to still be the perfect mother only when Winston showed up. There was no alarm at Winston's positive change in tone. By the New Year holidays, Terry felt that her love was no more visibly about to take wing between falling into the maelstrom of love. Nomad told her that he doesn't stay in one place longer than 2 or 3 months. He gets bored. Art school, where he learned a craft, abandoned in the 3rd year, won the craving for a change of places. In unknown lands, Terry broke away after the object of her love and a fortnight after the appearance of longing in his eyes. But first she was well prepared. She already knew that Winston had no secrets from his wife, so she invited them both to the cafe to talk about an important matter. Having ordered coffee and cakes for the whole company, to sweeten the pill, as she thought, she didn't beat around the bush. I've met the man of my life, it seems. The kind of love people call ready to follow him to the ends of the earth. Cassandra's no longer my thing. God knows I wasn't always such a bad mother to her. I'm attached to her in my own way. Now I want to get on with my own life. If you want, Slava, draw up the documents. I'll give you my daughter and go away. Christie was shocked by this proposal. She was not the least bit opposed to Winston's daughter living with them. But how can a mother give up her child like that? The image of Anthony's little boy floated before her eyes. A sharp needle of pain pricked at my heart. If you'd come back, darling, I'd never give you up to anyone aloud, however, she said. We are always responsible for our loved ones. Winston, you haven't said a word yet. And I'm ahead of the curve, as always. We agree, Terry, to take your little girl into our family. Do the necessary paperwork. We'll sign everything. And we'll get all the paperwork together on our end for Cassandra's adoption. Easily bypassing all sorts of bureaucratic hurdles, Winston and Christie adopted Cassandra in the shortest possible time. Cassandra had always been fond of her father. Her mother's departure was explained to her as a vital necessity, and she and Aunt Christie quickly hit it off. Cramped but not cramped. Now in their small one-room flat there was always a little bell-ringing voice, always taking part in all the household chores. Cassandra and Papa Winston hung the laundry on the balcony, helping Aunt Christie. And then the female half of the family would bake treats in the kitchen. From the other room came the voice of the head of the family. Hurry up and come and have tea. That would have been the end of the story. But it is not for us to decide what fate will do. She has already prepared new trials for these people. Another team was to go to the house where the house collapsed. Somebody in the heavenly office decided otherwise. A nurse at a neighboring substation slipped on the porch. The first frost had just arrived in the city, and the insidious ice had been forgotten. Somewhere on the other side of town, near a collapsed house, an ambulance was waiting for the unfortunate victims. The medical worker's leg swelled up before his eyes. Even without x-rays, it was clear to the specialists it was a fracture. Christie's team was rushed to the scene. Vanessa, as always, Miles indispensable for traveling on any type of road, Christie focused. All assembled were good to go. Even Vanessa doesn't argue about riding in the back. She quickly climbs into the seat with Miles in the cab. No time for arguments and bickering. A couple of days ago, Christie and Vanessa had a serious conversation. Outside of work, they are friendly and on a you basis. Only at work they keep the chain of command. The doctor started the dialogue. But I began to my subordinate not for faults in the service, but for Miles. Don't you have a heart? The whole substation is judging that Miles is pining for you, and you're like not native. I mean, he's good on the inside and out. And the scar on your face, that's a good look for a man. Why are you climbing the wall? I mean, he recoils at any touch from me. Am I unpleasant to him? Am I long? If he touches me, he bounces back. How am I supposed to understand this reaction to me? And you say he's in love. It's all bollocks. Now Vanessa drove beside Miles and again involuntarily admired his masculine profile. She was no longer intimidated by the scar that cut across his eyebrow and snaked down to his lips. Miles was attractive with that very masculine beauty that promised protection and strength to those around him. What remained a mystery was how deliberately he was avoiding her. If he loved her, why did he keep his distance? Miles was afraid to come within a meter of this woman. He was too fond of this person to offend her by an involuntary display of his masculine interest. Now, as soon as Vanessa turned briefly to the window, he glanced at her to admire her unassuming but lovely beauty again. When the nurse returned her head to its original position, Miles sat as if nothing had happened, staring straight ahead at the road. A crowd of curious people had gathered in front of the house where the collapse had occurred on the third and very last floor of a rather old building. It buzzed like hundreds of alarmed bumblebees, filled with rumors, fed with anxious reports from the rescuers, to buzz again in full force. You heard there was a girl crushed by something heavy on the ground floor. She's screaming in pain, and our brave rescuers can't get to her yet. Upon hearing this information, skinny and petite, Christie commanded, Vanessa, prepare a syringe of anesthetic. I'll try to get through to the injured little girl. At those words, Miles and Vanessa turned around without conspiring. You can't do that until the rescue team gives the go-ahead. The house could collapse at any moment. It's not the time to be afraid, the brave woman replied. There is a child there alone, scared, suffering pain. Why do we even have an ambulance if the rescuers are as slow as turtles? With a syringe of medicine in her outstretched hand, Christie rushed towards the building, near the wall of which the firemen in shiny helmets and the guys from the rescue service were working at the same time. Woman, where are you going? Christie was called. I'm going to try to crawl over to the girl and give her an anesthetic injection. I'm an EMT. It's too narrow in there. None of our guys could get in, she was warned. I'm going to try anyway. Building rubble, chunks of plaster falling off, blue paint streaks from the wall in the entryway, more rubble and endless dust. Christie was forced to kneel at first, then moved almost crawling. In her mind, she thanked her husband for making her keep fit all these years, going to the swimming pool twice a week, jogging with him in the mornings. At the end of the climb, she finally saw a little girl who had been crushed by a metal door from one of the flats. The little girl's legs were pressed against the heavy rectangular plate like a press, and for some reason they were sticking out towards the exit. It was as if the child had been running and trouble had caught her as she ran. She turned back and called out in a ringing voice, "Here, I'm quite through. 2 skinny men and a girl were crushed by the door, but I'm already giving her an anesthetic injection." "Don't shout." "For God's sake," came a whisper in reply. "Loud noises in such a dilapidated building are dangerous now." After a couple of minutes, the baby quieted down. Christy began to shoulder the metal barrier into the flat. With difficulty, but the thing moved. There were rustles from behind, and the woman whispered. The girl is relaxed by the injection. Drag her by her legs. I'll keep pushing the door in the opposite direction. Together the work went more vigorously. The men pulled the girl to the exit through the narrow labyrinth. The way back no longer seemed so uncharted. Christy hesitated for only a few minutes. Outside, people still didn't realize what had happened next. The building started to collapse like a house of cards before their eyes. Only 2 young boys managed to jump out of the building with a little girl in their arms. Christy, a well-known pediatric emergency room doctor in the city, was buried under the rubble forever. Calm. Always quick to focus in difficult situations. Vanessa, the nurse, screamed, rushed to Miles, who had already grabbed her in an armful and started stroking her head like a little girl. It seemed to both of them that they were now being swallowed up before their eyes by some ravenous monster, a toothy maw of rock-strewn debris. It lured Christy, who had bravely stepped into the tunnel with the syringe, inside and swallowed her without choking. People were bustling around. Someone said that the fate of 4 more tenants, orphaned in an instant, was unknown. Christy's crew stood in the midst of the chaos, hugging each other tightly. A little later, with the pretense that their presence here is no longer needed, went to the car, without unhooking the embrace. They had to go to Winston's now to tell him and little Cassandra the bitter news. A fortnight passed. Miles and Vanessa now had a new doctor in charge, an elderly pediatrician who had transferred to the ER from the city's children's clinic. The silent and even a little stern man was a qualified and experienced specialist. But the nurse and the driver felt their close-knit brigade went sole. Everything seemed to be as usual, and everything was wrong. There was no desire to go to work. The day Christy passed away in front of their eyes, they rushed straight to her house. Cassandra was in kindergarten. Winston was packing his bag to leave for another training session. Vanessa had never before seen the emotion on the face of someone who had learned sad news show in such a way. After their account of the last few minutes, it was as if a blackness had run across Winston's face. Just now his eyes were alive and shining. And then the light in them went out and his skin took on a gray hue. How can I find words to comfort a man in such a situation? Everything said would seem empty and unnecessary. Vanessa and Miles realized that now they were superfluous in the midst of this scorched desert. They did not want to scatter. Some thick, strong thread now bound this couple, who had just witnessed a terrible, hopeless tragedy. They arrived at Vanessa's flat together after their shift. It seemed to them both now that no words were needed to explain to each other how much time they had lost. Vanessa cooked a meal as if she'd done it for her and Miles 1,000 times before. Both of them had such a voracious appetite after the stress they'd been under, that a huge pan of fried potatoes, generously drenched in eggs, had been devoured in about 5 minutes. Before, Miles had always thought that if Vanessa were near him, he would pounce on her like a hungry wolf. That's not what happened. He had such tenderness for this woman that a little more and he would melt like ice cream in hot weather. Miles felt such happiness inside that it seemed as if all the long agony of waiting hadn't happened. When Vanessa fell into a restless sleep, he was still unable to fall into a restful slumber. He wondered if he had imagined that she, his woman, his dream, his vision, was really sleeping on his shoulder. He was very impressed by the warmth with which Vanessa touched even his ugly scar on his face, how she kissed the curved line, looked into his eyes, whether he liked her kind touch, and acted as if she were a hero, a protector, a support. He immediately remembered the disgust on his wife's face when he returned from the hospital after being wounded. They had not uttered a single word of "I love you," "I need you," or "I need you." Everything in their story had been said long ago. Now they were just proving to each other that everything wasn't a mistake, that it was worth it to be patient and wait for things to happen the way they had now. In the morning, Vanessa said nonchalantly, "Miles, you'd better stop by the house and pick up your things. At first, my flat is closer to work and more spacious. Then we'll figure out what to do with your place. I'd join forces with you and exchange our property for something bigger." Miles hadn't known what a quiet family home was before. He and his wife had lived in perpetual separation. He had felt a kind of adamancy all the time then, a kind of coldness within the home walls. It was like he was together with that woman of his. a persistent feeling that they live apart he never let go. That's why he was always on duty. With his Vanessa, it was different from the start. Some kind of reassurance that he was needed and important. That even when he goes to the supermarket to get groceries on behalf of his girlfriend, they have time to miss him. And they greet him so warmly on the doorstep, as if he were returning from some distant journey. Winston, after the tragic death of Christy, lived as if in a delirium. In the morning, he automatically prepared sandwiches and coffee for himself, while stirring on the cooker porridge on milk for Cassandra. The girl became his salvation, his outlet, his light in the window. In his spare time, he couldn't stay in their tiny flat at all. He, Christy, and his parents, after the grief that had fallen on the family, immediately gave up sharply. Almost simultaneously, they became helpless old men. The two eldest of the family began to seek solace in working the land, fanatically planted everything in a row in the garden, finding in this work, if not joy, then oblivion. They tried not to think, not to remember. Even their granddaughter was stubbornly not taken to them on weekends, and they couldn't cope with Cassandra, who asked 100 questions in a minute. Winston took his daughter on impromptu camping trips at weekends. They would go to a river somewhere far away, pitch a tent, wander around the steppe, pick wildflowers for Christy's grave. On the way back, they'd always stop at the cemetery. Winston sat down on a wooden bench and talked for a long time with his beloved woman, who had passed away prematurely. Unhurriedly, he would tell how his and Cassandra's week had gone. Sometimes he proudly boasted that his charges had again won another prize at a prestigious competition. Christy looked up at him from the photograph with her gray-green eyes and smiled that smile of hers with which she liked to announce her life motto. "We are responsible for everything. If something happens on the road, be good enough to go to the victorious end." After visiting the cemetery, Winston felt better for a while. And he also noticed a new peculiarity. He was annoyed by carefree women on the street. A cheerful girl would come along, and he would look after her and think angrily, "I wonder, my dear, and you would step like this, without fear under the ruins of a building held by a thread. If a stranger's child was crying there." A dark annoyance enveloped him. Why did they all go on living and his youth is gone from him forever? Cassandra had grown up all at once. In her very young years, she had turned into a sort of wise old woman. She'd never been cranky since kindergarten. Buckwheat porridge with sausages is the best meal for dinner, and the 101st time she read a bedtime story about Cinderella. Every time was like a new discovery. She wasn't afraid to stay home alone if Winston had to go somewhere urgent. After such absences, she'd always ask him thoughtfully, "Tired? Shall I put the kettle on? Let me take your dirty socks to the bath." She'd already lost her second mum, but she never asked Winston any questions along the lines of, "When's Mum coming back?" or "Why are we living together?" They were having a good time. Even in this orphan solitude, they always understood each other with half a word, half a look. Sometimes in the evenings, Miles and Vanessa came round with cakes or cake. Then they would have noisy tea parties together. They remembered Christy with a light sadness. All four at the table loved her. All four of them missed her very much. Winston sometimes painfully wanted to go somewhere far away from this city, where everything reminded of the happy past. But where to get a new, well-trained team of athletes? And his wife's grave is here. The old people are near. I had no desire to fight reality, no matter what. The anniversary of Christy's death was celebrated in a cafe. The brave doctor's former colleagues took care of everything themselves. Winston, Cassandra, parents were brought to the institution, where everything was already ready. Miles and Vanessa recently signed a marriage, deciding not to delay any longer with the officialization of their relationship. Their family was expecting a new addition in a couple of months. They had recently moved into a new flat, having bought it, as they were going to do, with the money from the sale of their bachelor flats. Many warm words were said to Christy at the table. No one wanted to part quickly. This time, even Winston's parents expressed a fervent desire to take the girl to themselves for a couple of days. They sincerely missed the little girl. Having seen off the last guests who had gathered in honor of his wife's memory, Winston wandered home through the very park where they had once met. The same bench in the shade of an old chestnut tree. The same alleys of shrubs and flowers, hiding couples in love from prying eyes. In the far corner of the footpath, some company was frolicking all around. There were 3 young men. All together they surrounded some girl, not allowing her to take a single step. Winston's eyes darkened for a moment. The victim of the youths was an exact replica of his wife in their early youth. Slim, with a lock of loose hair, the girl stood helplessly between the boys, clutching a dainty handbag. The boys moved predatorily toward Megan, tightening the ring around her more and more. Winston added a step. "Guys, don't you think the lady doesn't want to mingle with you?" One of the young predators turned his head slightly, hissed. "Man, you'd better keep walking past. We'll handle our friend here on our own without interference." A cold chill of rage ran through Winston's body, quickly turning into an angry volcanic scorcher. It was infinitely important to him right now to save this young girl, to stop the insolent subjects from mocking her. Even if the whole company was long and well acquainted, even if there was truly nothing threatening her, it was important to him to get her away from those insolent guys and get her away from here. "I don't think the brisk man understands us," one of the guys said. "Go the other way out of here, passerby. We're all our own people here, and you're an extra." Winston glanced at the girl, whose green eyes were filled with despair. She was silent, but her eyes were pleading for help. Winston could not be mistaken that she was uncomfortable with the unpleasant scene that had been played out here. "The girl will leave with me," Winston gave the boys an ultimatum. "Or are you going to regret that our paths have crossed?" "Look at that funny man," grinned one of the trio, stepping away from his friends and standing opposite Winston. "He doesn't understand orders the first time. He's got a bit of a hound." The boy quickly slipped his hand into his pocket and pulled out a small knife. "How's that for an argument, noble knight, who decided to save the honor of a lady he didn't know? Would you rather I tickle your throat with this toy? Or let's see if our lovely Megan likes that kind of game." Winston often dropped by to visit the instructors who rented one of the gyms at the martial arts school. He wasn't afraid of any attacks from the youngsters. Now it was important to him that they did not touch the girl, so similar to his wife at the time of their first dates. The boys rushed towards their victim, who instead of fleeing the scene, froze in place like a statue. They began to come in from all sides, but Winston was only aroused by this. He only had a couple of shots of vodka that night. The rest was done by hatred for the scum who thought that they were the masters of this park, that they were untouchable, and everything was allowed to them. And how much older he was than them, about 10 years, no more. They could almost be considered as one generation, but in the eyes of his opponents there was so much cruelty, felt such a craving for lawlessness and permissiveness, that it did not fit into the framework of decency and the understanding of the coach. The fight began sharply and fiercely. The guy with the knife scratched Winston's shoulder with the sharp blade almost immediately, as if teasing and inviting him to do more. The toughest of the 3 assailants grinned into Winston's eyes, trying to break him mentally at the start. The girl stood so still, mouth open, either from fear or confusion. "Get out of here," Winston shouted to her. "I don't want you here in a second." But she would not give up and shook her head vigorously. "I'm not leaving you alone with them. They've been after me for a long time. And here was a chance to be caught alone without friends, and even at a late hour. We all study together at the university, boys from the elite, from the golden youth. And I am an orphanage. It's like a red rag for a bull, for them. Everyone wonders what kind of life I had in childhood and youth in a state institution. It was not customary for us to leave our own behind. I'll be there for you." Winston was so distracted by the girl's monologue that he missed a couple of solid punches to the ribs. Something crunched inside a fracture, he thought grudgingly. Meanwhile, the guy with the knife decided to have a different kind of fun. He jumped up behind the fellow student and pressed the blade against her lower cheek. "So you say, my kitty, you're not used to leaving your own behind?" He grinned. "And if I scratch your throat on your cheeks now, will you abandon the whole park?" The girl, to everyone's surprise, who had been in a daze before, did not faint. She turned to the guy. A thin trickle of blood ran down her cheek. "I'm so sick of you at uni, you bastards and scum," she shouted. "You're nothing without your mums. You're nothing without a stick. That's what you can do for yourself in this life. If they take away your expensive car, your bling, your bank card, What will you know when you have to survive in a wild pack of teenagers? None of the men involved in the fight expected such a fight from the pretty student. The boys were completely furious, even their faces darkened with uncontrollable rage. Having removed the knife from the girl's throat, her opponent joined his friends. Now they surrounded Winston on all sides, like a mass of bodies and faces distorted by anger. He himself could not remember how he had pushed their supposed leader in the chest with all his might. He did a sort of gymnastic somersault, lifting his feet off the ground, and fell down on his back. The back of his head struck the sturdy curb of the alley. A ruby stain of thick blood instantly began to spread beneath the young man's head. Winston, who had so many times taken his boys from the section to the infirmary after injuries, instantly realized that it was bad. Habitually, he put his finger on his opponent's neck in the place where a vein usually beat. There was no pulse. The rest was like a blur. The girl regained consciousness. "First, call an ambulance and the police now. Nobody leave," she commanded. The boys frantically began to grab their phones, making calls to parents, services, and important acquaintances. Winston sat down on the curb next to a guy and thought frantically. Cassandra is now at home with her parents, who wanted to keep an eye on her today. I'll be detained, most likely. What will happen to the girl? He quickly beckoned the young student over to him. "What's your name?" "I'm going to need your help." "I'm Maggie. Tell me what needs to be done." "I'm Winston. Here's a note with my address, my flat keys, my friends Miles and Vanessa's phone number. My 5-year-old daughter Cassandra is at her parents' house right now. Take her and give her to my friends. They'll take care of her." When the police, ambulance, and a bunch of other people arrived, Winston was somehow completely calm. As the saying goes, you can't be safe from jail or want, he thought. I guess it's my turn to learn what it's like to eat government bread and live behind bars. So many important gentlemen had arrived, commanding the men in the prison and the guards who had come with them. Winston was probably lucky that he was taken to the police car at once. Otherwise, the loose dogs surrounding the dead guy's powerful father would have killed Winston on the spot. Maggie, who had been rescued by him from the borderless scum, was always hanging around him. She even managed to show the ambulance the cut on her neck to get a certificate of beatings, all the time she was telling something to the operatives and the investigator. They were brought to the police together. Winston's documents and mobile phone were immediately taken away. While they were dealing with him, Maggie ran like a mouse to the side and made a few phone calls. Then, meeting Winston's eyes, she gave him a thumbs up, saying that the mechanism for taking care of his daughter had been set in motion. She turned out to be a desperate person who manages to keep up with everything. At the trial, she presented everything in such colors that the rich, successful relatives of the participants of the fight were even astonished by such frankness. She found witnesses that the trio of golden boys had been harassing and humiliating her for a long time. Everyone in their group respected her, while these fellow students disliked her. It's not a pretty picture for the victim. Of course, Winston never wanted to hurt a guy who was just starting to live. It was too cruel, even for a young man with a temper. It just worked out the way it did. He was given 5 years in a penal colony for excessive self-defense. Thanks to Maggie's efforts, the judge made the best decision for him. The prosecution insisted on 8 years in prison, but she kept trying to shift the case to a less serious article. Winston did not know exactly how Miles and Vanessa managed to agree with the guardianship authorities, but his daughter Cassandra was given to them for upbringing during his stay in the colony. During the investigation, their family gave birth to Thomas the rosy-cheeked Thomas. The ambulance crew in the city turned out to have connections because they often saved the children of not only ordinary people, but also important officials. When Vanessa was allowed a date, she was able to reassure Winston. "Don't worry, mate, we'll be fine. You and Christy are not strangers to us. I'll write to you about her life regularly and with pleasure. Miles and I will come to your place for a date as soon as we're allowed. I thought you were doing time in a neighboring state. Well, it's not that far for us. And tell me, what are we going to do about your rescued Maggie?" Maggie visits the daycare center all the time, bringing her toys and sweets. She asks for our permission to take the girl out of kindergarten, walk with her in the park, go to the cinema for the premiere of a cartoon. Here did not think that the girl will turn out to be such a loyal friend. We met with her, of course, not under the best, one could even say, tragic circumstances. She so actively defended you during the investigation, so fiercely acted in court as the main witness. You never know how someone like that will behave in extreme circumstances. She was a good one. Jesus, Winston, you're so naive when it comes to the opposite sex. She fell in love with you at first sight. Chivalrous demeanor, protective, good looks. But you're wrong about your age. She went to university after law school. She's 23 now. You're only 9 years apart. She's the one who looks so young because of her petite stature and general fragility. She's got character. Look at the girl. You can't take Christy back. You're going to have a lot of good things ahead of you. You both deserve it. The guard who led the prisoner after his date with the young woman didn't understand why the stout man was smiling all the way to his cell. He could not have guessed that Winston was thinking that there might be happiness in his life if this vivacious person with green eyes waited for him after his imprisonment. Love comes in many forms. Someone constantly trades feelings for trifles, and someone remains the chosen one for many years without fear and reproach. It's a matter of luck.